Hey everybody, we're back. It's MP. Once again, I'm joined by Calum and DJ. This is our Season 7 Episode 2 Dragonstone review?
Stormborn.
Stormborn, shit.
Let's start as we mean to go on.
Yeah, this is where Claire and I would actually stop and then start over again. Yeah, so it's our Dragonstone review, and Calum, you take it away.
Is it Stormborn?
Stormborn, yes.
I love it when we get off to a flying start.
Yeah, it's so funny too, because the very first word I have on my page is Stormborn. Oh, because the first scene's Dragonstone. That's why. I was reading the wrong line.
Well, at least no one can accuse us of being unprepared.
Well, to start it off, why don't we mention that the scene starts with a storm?
Yes, it absolutely does. And we had a storm going on when we were watching it. It was awesome. Like actual huge thunderclaps and everything like that. It was great. Shout out to Thunderclap, by the way.
Awesome. But yeah, let's take this away. So
should we talk about the So obviously we're going to start with the Dany scene because that's the first scene in the chronological order that the episode is presented to us in. DJ, me and you had like sort of a disagreement, didn't we, about how Dany spoke to Varys and sort of what she said. Shall I just sort of relay my thoughts on it, and then you can
absolutely
you can sort of like counter or whatever, or just relay your thoughts. So obviously we're referring to the way that Dany sort of publicly questions and ousts Varys about the decisions he made while serving under King Robert, namely the assassination attempt of Daenerys. One thing that I found quite distasteful about this in one sort of sense is that the decisions that were made that she was calling Varys out on were, in my view, only made as a means for Varys to survive. I mean, I personally wouldn't have wanted to, deny a king's orders, especially when the king is Robert. So I would argue that the decisions that she's sort of publicly outing him for are decisions that he made, again, just purely because he had to. But I think this is quite an interesting point here because it speaks to Dany's weak spot within her sort of personality and just overall, which is betrayal. And I think that she finds it extremely difficult to forgive betrayal, regardless of the context. So this was shown with obviously Ser Jorah, despite everything that Jorah did for Dany, including obviously saving her from the aforementioned assassin, putting his life on the line for her on multiple occasions. She still obviously outlawed him. So she does have quite a severe history of betrayal, obviously right back to the beginning, where Jaime obviously betrayed her father, then Jorah betrayed her, then her brother betrayed her, and now Varys. She seems very susceptible to betrayal. And I feel as though she's somewhat weak-minded when it comes to learning and dealing with it, because she's very blind to the context. But I mean that point can be argued. And
yeah,
then
I would also say in the books it might it relates to her obsession with the betrayals that have been prophesized for her.
Yeah, and then
for love, etc. Yeah,
the two aspects of Dany's criticism of Varys that I found particularly ill-advised were the following. So I think, by the way, I don't think it was all bad because I did rewatch it after DJ's points. But the two aspects that I found to be quite bad, in my opinion, were when she said, "If you betray me, I'll burn you alive." I didn't feel like as though that needed to be said in public. I felt as though it was very much her being sort of reminiscent of the Mad King in a sense. And then also this sort of notion was reiterated later on when she says something along the lines of, when she's speaking to Melisandre, I think she says, "You chose an auspicious day to arrive at Dragonstone. We've just decided to pardon those who once served the wrong king," and then turns back again and looks at Varys. So I think those two things in particular were very unnecessary, considering she'd already made her point quite clearly. However, just one last thing, and I'll hand it over to you guys. One thing I will compliment Dany on with this particular scenario is sort of how she managed to elicit Varys's true feelings. Varys has been, renowned for being very secretive, sort of, speaking in riddles and keeping his true beliefs protected under the shroud of his personality. But I feel as though, in this scene, obviously, he publicly lays out his person for all of them to see, and I think that shows true respect for the people that he's sort of sharing the room with, if you like. And I feel as though Danny is a big part of how that information was elicited and why it was elicited. Over to you guys.
MP, I don't know if you have any reactions. I have quite a lot on this particular scene, actually.
No, then absolutely take it. I have some, but go for it.
I would say that the two scenes you pointed out with the I'll burn you alive and we've just decided to pardon those who once served the wrong king, I completely agree with. Especially the second one felt really backhanded and like totally unnecessary. And the first one, the I'll burn you alive, just felt like it was, I'm top dog, I'll always be top dog kind of a thing. It just felt like a very petty kind of power struggle there. But I do have a lot of thoughts on their interaction, and I think overall, that Danny did the right thing here in a way. So first, I'll note that Danny initiated that conversation with Varys after he was serving her platitudes, which is the same thing as she noted that people used to say to her brother, right? The kingdom raises secret toasts to you and all that stuff, that idea. So she initiated that conversation after Varys did something kind of similar. And I think that's what set her off. I think she had probably considered having this conversation for a while. It was kind of weird that they didn't have it sooner, really.
All we had of Danny and Varys, though, last season was just basically the very end, right? And sailing across the sea.
Yeah, but you'd think that sailing across the sea would afford you some time to have this conversation. But obviously for the show, you need to show it. And so they weren't going to show the travel, so they chose this moment to do this. And one question she brings up, which I actually find really interesting, is what were Varys's and Illyrio's motives for supporting, at least on the outside, supporting Viserys and giving the dragon eggs to Dany. It's a little different in the show because in the book we have Fagon, so we know that there is at the very least a backup plan, and at the very worst, that's their real plan. And Viserys and Dany were a ploy, so to speak. But she asks him, Varys is the master of whispers, and he knows a lot about a great many things, but somehow he didn't determine that Viserys clearly was not fit to be king, which I find a ridiculous notion. He's smarter than that, I think. What I like about the scene too is it's something it's a position we've never seen Varys in. He was put on edge, which is as far as mental sparring and verbal sparring goes, I mean, he's definitely one of the best. So to see somebody keep him on his toes was interesting, generally speaking.
Go ahead.
I was just really quickly, I was just going to say that on that note that DJ made, it sort of reminded me of the conversation that he had with Littlefinger, the whole chaos as a ladder sort of back and forth. That it was reminiscent of that in the sense that he'd sort of met his match, like intellectually, which is something that, again, like DJ said, is a scarce thing to see in this show. Did you want to add something, MP?
I forget what I was about to interject with, but yeah, with Varys and Littlefinger, they're sort of on the same level, whereas sort of with Dany, I would almost say that Varys is far superior, but he's not in a form of power in that moment. So he's actually put back on his heels. But this being a very eunuch-centric episode with Theon and Grey Worm, we see Varys actually has balls, which is cool. He stands up to somebody who could easily just in that second have his head chopped off, and he tells him exactly what he thinks, right? Did
you think it was interesting though, because that very much goes against Varys's sort of what we've come to know as Varys's personality and Varys's general way in which he goes about his goals, because he even said before that he would have, if he hadn't have made those decisions, he would have been he would have been at the he would have been killed by Robert, right? And so he's already admitted the fact that he'd prefer to go behind people's back and do things from the shadows as opposed to come out clean. So I think it's quite interesting how that personality trait was entirely altered in this scene.
I don't know if it necessarily was, though. We just perhaps saw another variant of Varys's capabilities, where he always ingratiates himself into the next person. Just because he went against her, maybe he knows, and I'm not saying he does or doesn't, that that's what she's going to respect and keep him. We think it's true. We feel like it's true. I feel like it's true what he said to her. It seems to be. Yet at the same time, he is a guy pulling all these strings, and for some reason, he did have intentions of bringing a war to Westeros, which in the end is always going to do some sort of harm, right? Like, he didn't know, as far as I can tell, didn't know dragons were going to be born, didn't know anything. DJ, you had mentioned why Varys and Illyrio. It's something I struggle with quite a bit too. First of all, we know where Varys is from. Like, he's from Essos somewhere, correct?
He's definitely somewhere in Essos, but I can't remember, unfortunately, off the top of my head. But actually, go ahead. But this goes into another point I have here too.
Sure. It's very curious to me why he's so interested in Westeros as opposed to Essos and all the shit that's going on over there. But he seems focused on Westeros, which is very strange. Anyways, go ahead.
I was just going to say, going to Varys's background, one motive I made a note of he may have had for selling Dany off, and this is kind of similar to the Fagon thing, where he has, him and Illyrio have Fagon raised in such a way as to try to make him the best king. He understands what it's like to be afraid and to be, to have to run away from things and understand the plight of the small folk and things like that. And he even makes a note. He said, "But you turned it to your advantage when she said you sold me off to Dothraki horse lords." And I wonder if part of that is why he respects her, is because, I mean, she was basically treated like property, much like he was. He mentions he was treated, he was sold as a slave. And it seems like if we're to take this as Varys's real values, the values he displayed in the scene, it seems like those values came from the suffering, he went through as a child, as a piece of property. And I think that Dany can relate to that. They can both meet on that same platform.
Gotcha.
I agree. Did you guys notice the this is obviously relating to the same scene, however on a somewhat different thread. Just sort of a quick point that they've used two sheep related metaphors in 2 episodes. So you've got, in the previous episode, you've got Arya whilst under the guise of Walder Frey saying, "Leave one wolf alive," and the sheep are never safe. Mm-hmm. And then in this scene, you've got what's the?
It was later. It was actually later, not in this.
Yeah, the next scene over.
And then you've got Olenna Tyrell saying, like, "The Lords of Westeros are sheep. Are you a sheep? No, you're a dragon. Be a dragon." Yeah. I think it's that has to be done. I'm not sure why they've done that, but the fact that they've used 2 sheep-related metaphors with, like, consecutively has to be a point of interest.
The showrunners definitely do that quite a lot. I think in different seasons they seem to choose particular phrases or certain imagery that they repeat throughout a season.
Yes, but the sheep metaphor, I guess, is very apparent within the books with the lamb men of Essos, right? That just follow the Dothraki horde and never put up a fight, and they just once they get overthrown, like, well, I guess we're with you guys now, and they just walk behind them, following them. It's. I mean, I don't think it's that hard to figure out what George is playing with there, as opposed to think for yourself and don't just follow people blindly, which we have Varys saying in this episode 2, right? Which is probably my favorite quote of the show. I forgot to ask you guys to do that again, but hopefully you have something. "Incompetent should not be rewarded with blind loyalty. As long as I have my eyes, I'll use them." Which Varys obviously is not a sheep. He's always doing something to get what he wants for his own objectives. You guys both touched on the "if you betray me, I'll burn you alive." I do believe that's actual throwback to show that we have a little bit of Mad King within Dany somewhere. Like it's exactly, and they point out at the end of the show with Jon and Sansa exactly that. Except she said, Sansa says roasted him alive.
I would also say note how uncomfortable she looked when Tyrion said, "But you will not be the King of Ashes, will you?" or something like that. She looked very uncomfortable.
See that? Go ahead.
I was just going to say it looked like she had to pull back a second and remind herself of that.
Which is a good point, which is just what I was going to jump in with. It reminded me of the scene at the House of the Undying when she's walking through to the Iron Throne and we have the snow and the ash covering everything, and she's about to grab or sit or do whatever, touch the Iron Throne, and then she turns away. So maybe that prophecy that we saw was her deciding then and there that this isn't the way I want to take this place. Yet it might also be showing her that that's actually what's going to happen, and you're going to have to make a choice sooner or later. I'm not certain about that, but
yeah, and that's something I want to discuss too after the last scene with Euron. Is
okay.
What options does she have now in terms of will she?
I think it's just speaking on that. Speaking like sort of on that, I think it's quite interesting to sort of behold how Tyrion's sort of methodology of ruling is starting to seep through with Daenerys. Because you can bet your bottom dollar that it wasn't Daenerys' idea to starve out King's Landing. That has got Tyrion's name written all over it, and it's quite nice to see sort of his influence with her and the trust that they're sort of beginning to build. And I think that will definitely, as long as she doesn't allow what Olenna Tyrell said to sort of rule her decision making, I think that will be the start of a very strong connection between those two characters.
Yeah, I hope she doesn't listen to Olenna personally. On that note, though, did you guys notice the lions on the table?
On the war table, yeah.
So when you first see it, you have the two lions up front, which represent Jaime and Cersei, the twins, and then behind them, in the middle, is Tyrion, sort of out of focus.
Ooh.
Which I'm assuming sort of shows that Tyrion is still a Lannister, but his loyalties are no longer with these two. But my question here is, if he gets a hold of power at Casterly Rock, does it somewhat corrupt him now becoming the Lord of Casterly Rock, like the top of House Lannister? Does he sort of get corrupted in that moment, I'm wondering, or is Tyrion always going to be Tyrion?
I can see what you're saying. However, I feel as though sort of his hatred for his father will sort of quell that ambition potentially, because in that sense, going along what you're saying, he would sort of fall into the category of his father, and I think that's something that he wants to avoid quite severely.
I wonder if he wants the power over Casterly Rock almost out of spite.
Could be out of spite, absolutely, but I'm still I'm in agreement with you guys. I'm just wondering how, when push comes to shove, especially in regards to Jaime, I don't care so much about Cersei, but last season, Dany said something about the Lannisters, and Tyrion he gave like a little wince, like that stung him, because he still has connection to them, which I thought actually, there is another point. It's not in my notes here, but it was in my first session notes. Dany's homecoming, and she says, this doesn't feel like home. Would you assume that it should at that point? Like, is anything there going to feel like home to her? What does she expect to happen?
Yeah, no, I think this goes back to the idea that this was never her dream. It was always Viserys' dream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that
her dream of home,
what she was speaking to,
was the house with the red door.
Yeah, her dream of home involved, I think, which there's some notes about this too. Her memory around what would be home. Even in this episode, she says, "I wish I could remember it," in reference to her being born in a storm. And I think there's a lot of fuzziness around her memories of her childhood in the books.
Agree. I absolutely agree, and I can't wait for next episode because I want to see what happens with Davos. But anyways,
just to play devil's advocate on that point, you could some people might argue that you're sort of looking too much into that, just based on the fact that she sort of come so far but made no ground, in the sense of, you know, she never wanted Dragonstone. Obviously, I mean, you're arguing that she doesn't want the queenhood at all, but other people may say that it's not Dragonstone that she crossed the Narrow Sea to take. It's King's Landing and it's the Iron Throne. Dragonstone is very much just a means to an end, and that's why maybe it doesn't feel like home, as opposed to, you know, the Red Keep may do.
Sure, and I see what you're saying. Although Dragonstone is the ancestral seat of her family, but yet it's very dark and dingy, and it's nothing that Dany's become accustomed to, maybe even her whole life, except for when she was with the Dothraki and perhaps the Dosh Khaleen. Like, she's always had a fair amount of luxury. The second thing is she's always been traveling. It's almost like as soon as she gets someplace, she wants to be going on again. Like, she's never really sat down for a while anywhere, right? She's constantly in motion, looking for something that's probably not going to be achievable in the end, in my thinking.
Yeah, no, that's good. At Marine, she had to force herself to stay. I mean, she could have left Marine with the ships and sailed to Westeros then, but she said, no, I have to bring, you know, some sort of stability here, because I'm the one that took it, and it doesn't really work that well for her.
Dario's cleaned it up now, though. He stayed around and everything's spick and span now.
Yeah, I'm sure. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, she is generally on the move. And actually, one of the questions I asked myself during this conversation with her and Varys is, I wonder if Dany will sort of be the power which, or the force which takes out the current power structure in Westeros, but whether she actually wants to then keep it and rule the kingdom. I wonder if Varys might convince Dany to hand that power over afterwards, which would be ideal, obviously, if she's able to take out the old feudal traditionalism and then hand the power over and let the people run with it. That's kind of ideal. I don't know how strongly I feel that will happen, but
I think that's interesting, just because it ties back to I think this was season 5, when she says something along the lines of, you know, Lannister, Stark, Tyrell, etc. They're all just spokes on a wheel, and I don't want to. She doesn't want to add Targaryen to the wheel. She wants to break the wheel entirely, and I think that sort of ties into what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
Very good.
That's
very good.
A great thought.
Yeah, that's also a good segue about sort of probably coming on to our next scene there with Melisandre. Excuse me.
Before we do, can I make one more note on
That's
this?
all right. I want to as well.
This Varys conversation, because me and Calum had gone back and forth a little bit on this, but one thing, I think one of the best reasons Dany had to out Varys in front of the other, her small council, Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Missandei, was that by doing so, and having Varys pledge his loyalty, at least as far as he can due to his values, to swear her loyalty, if he starts to scheme with the small council, they now know. I mean, they saw him outed in that conversation. So if he starts to try to scheme and starts to try to turn them, they're going to be on their guard. So I actually think that was quite an intelligent move on her part, by doing that in front of the small council.
Sure. Although, if you notice in that scene during Varys's, sorry, Calum, I'm sure you have a rebuttal here too. But Varys's statement, it's Grey Worm and Missandei that seem the most, on board with what he's saying, because that's sort of, he was raised like they were, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The camera goes to both of them before it goes to Dany, I believe, showing that they're very interested in listening to what he's saying. Last sort of thing that I wanted to bring up, unless you have a rebuttal there, Cal, go ahead.
No, I think that point is very well made. The only thing I'd personally say to that is whether or not that was her intention, or whether or not that is simply just the result of her sort of hot-headedness is up for debate. But I do completely agree with the point you made.
The last thing I wanted to add, which is just a question, was Varys says, point of factly, I wasn't born into a great house. Now, assuming that he is, as people tend to believe, a Blackfire, is that a great house, or is he referencing sort of Targaryen and saying that the Blackfires are a minor house?
I don't think they'd be considered a house at all in terms of Westeros.
No.
That might be the point he was, I mean, maybe metaphorically referring to there, is that they're so low that they're not considered any kind of house. They were just rebels and usurpers.
Sort of had that into my Varys's obsession with Westeros sort of question there, but I skipped over it. What about Mel? Moving on, anyways. Are we good to go?
I'm finished with the Dany scene. If you guys are.
Yep, we can move on to Dany and Mel.
You have nothing there either, Calum?
No, I'm finished personally with the Dany scene, but I'm happy to for you guys to go for it.
Yeah, you'll probably figure out some stuff when we go along. Do you have any good points there, DJ?
Sure. I have a couple things that came up. I wonder if there was any significance, maybe just a reflection of the conversation that just happened, of the fact that Varys was behind everybody else. When they were talking to Melisandre, it was Dany in the front and then the small council, but Varys behind even them. And I mean, that might have just simply been a reference to, him being the Master of Whispers, who works in the shadows. But I wonder if maybe there was sort of a backstabbing theme there.
Very much could be. I mean, first of all, into that whole thing, what we have here is after the first scene, we have Varys being presented with a new candidate for royalty or to sit upon the Iron Throne in Jon Snow, somebody who's doing great things up in the north that he arguably didn't really know about. Now he does. Now he's in Varys' sort of scope, so we don't know how that's going to play out in the end. But very, very much could be a backstabbing sort of scenario.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because obviously with Varys laying his sort of motives down on the table for everyone to see, if he's basing his sort of allegiance purely to the person who he thinks can benefit the realm in an sort of overall more so than anyone else, I think that you'd sort of be hard pressed to argue that Dany's that person over Jon Snow. So I do think it's interesting that you bring that up.
Anything else?
Yep. I got a couple notes on the whole prince/princess thing.
Sure.
Generally, it was just a ham-fisted exposition. I thought it was a poor dialogue, poorly written dialogue. But there was one thing that struck me is after Tyrion says it doesn't really roll off the tongue, and then Dany says, "But I like it better."
Mm-hmm.
Going back to to whether Dany is a good candidate, because it seemed very narcissistic to say that, and I feel like often we get two very different Daenerys's in these scenes. It's like you have these moments where you're like, Dany is righteous and standing up for the right things, and then you get these moments like you said that remind you a little bit of the Mad King, and just some narcissism poking out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very Viserys-like, right? Well, I like it better. I want it that way. This is going to be the way I have it. Yeah, no, absolutely. In regards to the prince or princess will bring the dawn. First of all, yes, Missandei's interjection there was just completely flat. It's just like, here you guys go. Here's some information.
Yeah.
It just didn't play well.
She could have just said the word exposition and would have been better.
Exposition coming now. But when you hear the prince or princess will bring the dawn, what is it? What does that mean to you guys?
Well, I mean, it's on sort of face value. I assume it's referring to sort of the War for the Dawn, and this particular person, be it now that we know either a woman or a man, they're going to have a really significant part to play in, allowing the human race to survive the long night. I think that's on face value what it means. Whether or not it has like sort of more subverted and more intricate meanings is up for discussion. But I think on face value, it's quite obvious to that.
Sure. And obviously, I'm reaching for the other, which is to me the bringing of the dawn after the long night, which we'll get into it sometime during this season. But it's realization, right? It's, oh, that just dawned on me. Something happens that we talked about the Black Swan last episode, but that changes your outlook on the world, and you have a new perspective, a new way of thinking about things. And I think ultimately that's what the Dawn represents, is figuring stuff out in more ways than one in regards to the book. And one way is just us getting the answers that we're looking for within the book, as opposed to whatever George's actual intent is.
Can I launch off that? Because I might have a decent observation off that, which is the idea that by the end of this series, we may reach something akin to the Enlightenment period in Europe. And this may go back to things like how I said maybe Dany will hand over power, and sort of how the structure of power and how people think might change very drastically by the end of this series. So when you talk about the dawn and how it dawned on you, it just maybe is reminiscent of the Enlightenment
Age. No, that's perfect. I love that.
It'll be quite interesting to see if by the end of the show there is sort of a restructure of the political hierarchy, because what we currently see is very reminiscent of sort of like old school like sort of 18th century and previous, like Britain and many other European countries, where you've got a very strict and stringent social hierarchy. You've got peasants, lords, king, essentially, and I feel as though there's not a great deal of time to sort of to replace that with a public representation style of governance. And people generally do think that that's the way that the show is heading in terms of the conclusive episodes, but I feel as though they'd be quite hard pressed to convincingly relay the social changes necessary to replace such a
maybe
deep-rooted.
Well, they are already in place at the Wall, correct? At least in a democratic vote, so to speak.
They are, but that's done
it's a
on
small
purpose.
Community.
It's a very small community, and the only hierarchy is sort of electoral, because they're all in the same boat, if you like.
I would also say, I think you have something there, because I think changing it that drastically in the short amount of time is, if not impossible, at least unlikely. But what you may have, if say Dany gives over power, or whoever, right? I'm not sticking to the Dany gives over power thing, but possibly by the end you start to have transitions, because there are forms of government transitioning between something like a monarchy and a democracy, something like an oligarchy of sort, where it's ruled by a group or something. It's not necessarily as rigid a social structure, but it's not quite what we would call a democracy now. So
it doesn't have to happen bing bang boom and then all of a sudden democracy spreads through the land. If we get something that mentions the idea of democracy, that's like a dream of spring. We have the idea of how we progress within the future. Which I think probably fits. In my personal head, I always thought that the dragon has 3 heads. I always figured like Westeros is somehow the dragon, and it's going to be broken up into 3 parts, which is the north, the wall to the neck, and then the south, and then maybe perhaps a 4th part with Dorne. But Dorne's always been sort of separate in its own right anyways. That's how I always saw it sort of happening. I don't know if that plays into what you guys are thinking, but I think the breaking up of once a big kingdom back to people. You have the northern people, you have the Dornish, you have
several kingdoms,
several kingdoms that interact with each other peacefully. You have the European Union, right?
Do you foresee a central government, or do you see them all as individual and sovereign countries?
Probably maybe some sort of great council between them, perhaps like a United Nations sort of meeting every once in a while. I don't know. I haven't gone that far into it. I just see them breaking up, and that's where my thinking stops.
I quite appreciate your line of thinking on that topic.
I
agree with it as well.
I actually made a note later in the episode about the 3 heads of the dragon, and how we currently have 3 kingdoms, with the north, Cersei, and in a sense Dany. And then I also thought about the idea if and especially right after this last episode, suddenly we have 3 queens in a way, because we have Sansa, Cersei, and Dany. So I thought that was kind of an interesting note to make.
Excellent. You guys want to move on swiftly to the Jon Snow scene in the north?
Not yet. I still have one more thing at least on this for now, and then I'm into Jon Snow.
No problem.
Me too. I just have one quick thing. You want
Go ahead, DJ.
I was just gonna mention that I actually liked that Mel didn't try to explain to Dany about the Great Other or the dead. She actually said, "Let Jon, summon Jon Snow and let him tell you the things he's seen." So instead of trying to explain it herself, she said, "Get it firsthand so that you can better understand what's going on."
And with something that he's seen with his own eyes rather than rumor or anything like that. Like she herself hasn't actually seen any of them, has she?
No.
And
not outside of the fire, at least. The flames.
Yeah. So my whole section here with Dany and Mel, I have titled is just semantics. So everything that I'm talking about is just a way of interpreting the dialogue that's been said. But I believe you have a role to play, as does another, and then Jon Snow. I thought it was kind of, especially if people like James Johnson's thoughts on Dany will either marry the Night's King or the Night King or be taken by him. The way she says it is, I believe you have a role to play, as does an other. Ding, 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 like a White Walker has a role to play, which they do, obviously, in some sort of fashion. Because there's a pause there before she says Jon Snow. Although,
do you know if James brought that up in the past small council meeting?
I don't. I have not watched all of the small council. I watched the first 20 minutes or so, but I haven't watched it this season. Apologies to everybody for not making that. I had sort of a little family matter to attend to. But I was hoping that he would. When I saw it, I was like, oh, I bet you James is going to bring that up. So if he did, I apologize for stealing that, as I do for anything that I bring up here that
it's not stealing if you didn't know.
Said. But the last one that I had was, tell him his queen invites him to come to Dragonstone and bend a knee. Now, first of all, we have his queen, so implications of perhaps marriage between Jon and Dany there. Not something I'm keen on myself, but perhaps for the show, it might work out. Maybe even the books as well. It's not that big of a stretch to assume that at one point in time they'll get married and it's its own thing. I'm not a fan of that idea, but it could happen. And then bend the knee, we assume that we know Jon's not going to bend the knee. But what if we look at it like a proposal and Jon actually bends the knee that way, which is something he might be able to do?
Yeah, that is an interesting thought.
I actually didn't think of that.
It's just semantics, but it's how we can interpret something that's being said. And that's all I have for Dany.
That's good.
DJ, did you want to finish us off, and then we could head over
that was
to
it.
Johnson?
Yeah, I said everything I wanted to. I think mostly about the Dragonstone stuff.
So are we going to Johnson now?
You know what? I lied. There was one thing I missed, I'm sorry, but I actually really liked this. The part where, and we're going back actually a little further, where Varys says to Dany, "I choose you."
Yeah.
You could see Dany was taken aback a little bit from that, but I thought this was an interesting line because I think even though Varys was on his toes, I think that that she was keeping Varys on his back foot, that he was in his own way still sneaking, his typical Varys digs in there. And what this reminded me of is, in a way, that he's reminding her that the power she has really comes from the fact that she has inspired people to follow her. And in the "I choose you" thing spoke to that, but the power can be taken, but her power comes from the fact that other people agree with her values and want to fight for those values. And as long as that's the case, they'll follow her, but otherwise she may be in some trouble.
I think one potential. Sorry, do you want to say something, Doug?
No, I was just going to say that's pretty brilliant.
I think it's brilliant as well. However, I do think you're missing one quite vital aspect of why people choose to follow Daenerys, which it sort of goes back to the old saying of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So you've got people who don't necessarily. I think this is actually touched on in the episode. I can't remember if it was. I'm fairly certain that Dany said something similar to this. to Olenna. But I think what you've got here is in many cases, you are right, DJ. It's the sort of the inspiration and sort of using that method to rally people to her cause. But you've also got in the same light and sort of in the same, I'd argue in the same sort of in the same number potentially, you've got people who are simply so are so disgusted and so disappointed and so unsupportive of Cersei that instead of the only sort of reason that they're backing Dany is because she's a decent threat to the throne, and she aligns with their main goals, which is taking the throne away from Cersei Lannister.
Well, that brings up an interesting point for me too, which is the people who followed her from Essos, they chose her because of the inspiration thing. But what can she do in Westeros that will inspire either the common folk or the houses to support her claim? Right now, you're right. It is just the enemy of my enemy, right? I wonder if because slavery doesn't exist in Westeros, so she can't inspire people by wiping out slavery, for instance. But there are, I think, some paths she can take to inspire people. Whether she will or not, I don't know. But
yeah,
things like empowering the small folk.
She had sort of tools beforehand that she could use to her advantage, whereas Westeros seemingly a bit more modern than Essos. She doesn't have those archaic things like slavery or anything like that to sort of play with. I actually do have more here. Sorry, I had a dragon's finger that came up at the end too.
I will say this is the scene I had the most notes for. So as soon as we move past this, we'll be a little bit better. But
so a lot of this I have already talked on and asked questions about. These are just observations. That more than anything is Tyrion and Ilaria, or what's her name? Is that right?
Sand.
Yeah, is that the mother, Ilaria? I always get her confused with Elia. He says, I know how you wage war. We don't poison little girls like you have. Myrcella wasn't innocent. Yet the reason that they poisoned Myrcella is because Elia's children got their heads bashed in way back when. So it's just sort of repeating itself. Bloodshed begets more bloodshed sort of thing. Then it was the Queen of the Ashes. Will Tyrion's mindset shift? And I know we talked about Dany's hair last episode, but in this one, probably because you had brought it up and I was thinking about it, I noticed that on the back of her head, it almost looks like a kraken. Only the first scene, though, not the second scene with her, but the first scene, it's the way her hair is bunned up and then it has like 8 legs sort of coming around, grabbing the back of her head, which sort of came into to play this episode. I don't know if that means anything or if I'm really, really stretching, but I'm going with it. If we're talking about hair, we can do that.
Let's start. Let's start really digging into people's hairstyles and
everything. Or also, it was the Myronese knot. Hey, you were talking about Sansa's hair earlier too, or last.
Oh,
let's start with Varys' hair.
It's not a criticism, trust me. Yeah, let's start with Varys.
Hey, talking about hair, the reason Dany's hair burns off when she first walks into the pyre in the very first book, we didn't get it in the show, but it's to show that hair color means nothing. That's why her hair fried and she was bald in the very, very beginning. Anyways, yes, now we can move on. Sorry, just had to add those in there because I found them.
Should I take it away with this one? Because I have a sort of a theory I wanna share.
Absolutely.
So I'll just preface this with a scene that sort of parallels with a scene that we saw in this episode. Which is, if we go back to season 1, when Ned realizes that Littlefinger is sort of holding up what's her name? Oh, fuck's sake, I forgot her name. Ned's wife. What's her name? It's I've lost it. Cat. Yeah. When Ned comes to the realization that Littlefinger's holding up Cat in the brothel, he holds Littlefinger by the throat against the wall, in a very similar and almost identical way to how Jon did that in this episode. And you'll note in the result of which was Ned being betrayed by Littlefinger and ultimately killed. And I feel as though this is an interesting thread, and you'll see why when I sort of unravel my theory, which is that when Jon was sort of leaving Winterfell and he, looked up at Sansa just before leaving, the score that was playing, the music that was playing whilst he was doing so it wasn't identical. So someone may argue that it's unrelated. It wasn't identical, but it was, for my personal opinion, extremely similar to just prior to when he was betrayed by the Night's Watch. So I think that's quite an interesting potential foreshadow of a betrayal at the hands of Sansa's tongue, but from Littlefinger's words. And I think we've seen a build-up of this starting to sort of the void between Sansa and Jon is starting to widen. And I feel as though this is shown by the sort of disagreements that have been had with Sansa and Jon. Firstly, regarding the battle tactics prior to Battle of the Bastards, and then obviously we've had two public displays of conflict. Those being the disagreement about what should happen to the treasonous families, and then again in this episode, we've had the disagreement regarding whether Jon should go to meet Dany or not, and Sansa was very adamant that she didn't want Jon to leave. But one thing you'll notice is how when Sansa realizes that she is the one who will hold the power in Winterfell once Jon leaves, she very quickly changed her sort of outlook, and she had no problem with letting Jon go, despite her past experiences with her family members traveling south. And I feel as though she realized that, hang on a minute, this is what I want. I want the power here, and this is my opportunity for it. And I think that the two things that I've, obviously the two or three pieces of evidence that I gave prior to this point is quite clearly, in my view, a foreshadow of a betrayal of Jon at the hands of Sansa.
I don't want to see that, but yeah. No.
I made the same note about that. It was like Sansa seemed so genuinely concerned for Jon and for the North. You're abandoning your people. But as soon as he said he was leaving Winterfell to her, she just completely resigned. Like, okay, cool.
I thought she looked a little bit intimidated by the aspect of it myself, but
I also noticed that she kept looking at Littlefinger throughout that scene.
Yeah, which would be that she knows Littlefinger is gonna have a part to play or a plan for her. Whether or not she accepts it, who knows? I don't think she will.
She's definitely influenced by Littlefinger a lot more than the show would have us believe, in my opinion. One of the key differences between the books and the show is obviously the books we can sort of easily delve into the minds of the characters purely because purely because George writes what they're thinking in many cases. Whereas in the show, you have to sort of deduce what they're thinking based on their outward appearance. But I do think that Littlefinger is definitely playing a part in Sansa's mind at the moment, and I feel as though that is sort of reflected in what DJ said of the constant sort of looking over to Littlefinger. This has been happening now in every single major situation that we've had since season 6, episode 10. Even when Jon was crowned king, the first thing she does after looking at Jon is she looks straight over to Littlefinger, and I feel that sort of subconscious look to Littlefinger at every given moment is sort of a metaphorical representation of the whole looking up to him and looking for his guidance. And I think that he will guide her in the direction that I've just previously outlined in my theory.
I'll play devil's advocate here, and I will challenge that with perhaps. I mean, it's all good arguments, but perhaps when she looks over to Littlefinger, she's wondering to herself, what's he plotting now? I mean, personally, when I see Jon and Sansa fighting in the shows or arguing, I like that better than, once again, blind loyalty, right? Like, just, if you think that I'm doing something wrong, tell me to my face, this is what Sansa's doing. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's perhaps a little embarrassing for the king, but I think Jon ultimately respects that in the end, even if he sort of gave her shit about it the first time, which I kind of forgot about until after I said that. So now I'm kind of on my heels against what I just said. But anyways, in the end, I think he'll respect that. Put it that way. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be challenged if somebody believes you're doing something wrong. You can still make your own choice. And Jon is the person that's always done that. He's always He let through the wildlings. When he thinks something's right, he concentrates on what he believes as opposed to what anybody else says. He doesn't give him shit for saying it to him, but he's going to make his own choice, which I really respect for John. He does that all throughout the show. Don't go to the wall. I'm going to the wall. I'm leaving the wall. The one time he did listen to people was when they chased him and brought him back to the wall. Right, but again, he's joined the wildlings. He's left the wildlings. He does what he thinks is in the best interest of the people that he's sort of protecting at the time, which is cool. So yes, Sansa will probably have some power mad moments, and I can't argue against the fact that she might not seize power, but will it matter? Somebody's going to need to be there in Winterfell while Jon's in battle. Sansa is not a person that I can't see Sansa wielding a sword running off into battle, even though 10-year-old girls and boys are. I don't see Sansa doing it. She'll be more manipulating behind the scenes and winning the war that way, as opposed to battle. That's my devil's advocate. I know I segued a little bit off there, but that's sort of what I see with it. I don't think it's a bad thing that there's a rift between them, as long as in the end they talk to each other.
Yeah,
I like that. I take notes by scene, so even though Winterfell was split up, I do have them split up in my notes. Do you mind if we go back to the beginning here?
Yeah, sure, sure thing.
I want to point out, I don't know if you guys caught that in the literally the opening cut to the first Winterfell scene. It's showing children being trained to fight. So I thought it was picking up from where we left last time with them discussing the fact that men, women, children, everybody has to be able to fight in the coming war. So I thought it was cool that they started the scene like that.
Yeah, no, that is good. I noticed how it came. You're talking about the arrow sort of hitting the thing, right? Yeah, I noticed that arrow, and had a different recollection of it. I can't remember the scene right before, but it was Dany summoning Jon or whatever. Then it shows to that arrow, and I went to some other place, and I'm not going to get into it, but because it was stupid.
Speaking of stupid things, just really quickly, and then I'll hand over to you guys. I made sort of what I would class as potentially a pointless observation, but it was quite interesting nonetheless. Did you guys notice how on the exit to the when Jon was exiting the crypts, there were two statues posted out just outside the entrance, and in season 1, essentially what they were in season 1 were like statues of wolves, and when Jon left the crypt, the wolves had their heads chopped off.
Oh,
so
it's not.
So I went back and I compared them, and basically what it says to me is that Ramsay had chopped off the heads of the wolves, and they haven't yet, replaced them or whatnot. And I feel that potentially might be like sort of an interesting thread to pull on, potentially alluding to like Winterfell is never going to be the same again since Ramsay, potentially Sansa pregnant, maybe. But that's a completely different area of topic.
About that observation is the fact that when you go into the crypts, though, both Lyanna and Ned, which are the two statues you get the best view of in that crypt scene, are completely intact.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and they always kind of hint at the fact that, I mean, other than Lady Dustin in the books, like nobody but Starks ever really go into that crypt. And Jon even says to Littlefinger, "You don't belong here." Yeah. Right? It's almost like even Ramsay didn't go down there to destroy anything,
Which is now that you said it from your lips to my ears, that's Jon's dream, right? I don't belong here. I'm not a Stark. When he walks down into the crypts, he says those exact words about himself, right? I don't belong here. I think, of course, he does, but it's just interesting that he said that to Littlefinger not being a Stark. I did not pick that up. That's a really cool observation. I wish I would have seen that.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was so happy to see the statue of Ned. I was like, yes, that's cool. I felt good seeing him again. And especially him watching over Jon doing the exact same thing was awesome. Anyways, go on.
More stuff about the crypt, I guess, would be, I don't know if I would encourage you if you didn't feel this way, go back and rewatch it and tell me if you feel this afterwards. Jon in the crypt scene reminds me so much of Ned. I actually think Kit Harington must have watched Sean Bean videos because I genuinely, I mean, like the mannerisms, the way he spoke, even a little bit of an accent, like an affectation he put on, reminded me so much of Ned in that scene. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Go back and rewatch it and tell me if you feel the same
Absolutely, I will.
next time we talk.
Going on to that note, though, when he's speaking to the lords, he recalls basically Ned's reason for taking over Winterfell way back when, and he says to them, "You all crowned me your king. I never wanted it. I never asked for it, but I accepted it because the North is my home. It's part of me, and I will never stop fighting for it, no matter the odds. But the odds are against us." This is Ned never wanted to be Lord of Winterfell. That was supposed to be Brandon's. But when he was next in line, he had to become Lord to marry Catelyn, to fulfill sort of Ned's father's pact with Hoster Tully, Catelyn's father. He accepted it and became the Lord of Winterfell, even though he didn't want it. And we get that in the books too. None of this was meant for me. It was all meant for Brandon. I just sort of had to do this, which is exactly what Jon is. So you saying that he mimics Ned perfectly there. He does it again in sort of that scene. He's being his father. And I assume Ned plays in Jon's head. Jon always says Ned would do what was right as opposed to what he needs to do. He would just do what's right.
I think there's actually quite some substantial evidence on that point, specifically on the point that there's sort of some of Ned's sort of philosophies subconsciously manifested themselves in Jon's sort of outlook. And I think one major piece of evidence, I think I actually mentioned this when we did our season 6 review on your channel, MP, with Claire.
Okay.
So obviously one of Ned's most famous lines is, "Whoever passes the sentence should swing the sword." And I think you're going to get what I'm going for here, because I think we've talked about this. But when Jon sentenced the Night's Watchman who betrayed him to death, you'll notice that when he hanged them, he made like a significant and overt effort to actually swing a sword, despite the fact that swinging a sword was not necessary to hang multiple people. It could have been a latch or a dropping floor or anything of sort of that kind. Whereas Jon made a real effort to swing the sword, and I think that plays into the fact that his perceived father or uncle, whichever sort of theory you want to go down, whichever sort of theory you want to go down, it's interesting that everything that Ned's sort of done or said is very much reciprocated in Jon's actions recently. So that's
regardless if it's nature or nurture. Ned, for all aspects, whichever way you lean towards Ned being his biological or whatever father, in essence, Ned was always Jon's father, regardless, and Jon's picking up those traits.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, Calum, they even pointed that out again. Was it last episode or this one where he said that Ned, my father always told me he who passes the sentence should swing the sword. And Jon actually does bring that up again, just in one of these last 2 episodes. Can't remember which one.
Oh, he also mentions to Sansa, my father always, or father always told me that everything that comes after the word "but" is horse shit. So
he did that though in his thing, which is interesting. So that quote that I did, I'll read it to you all again because there's a button there, and you just brought it to my attention. Because I looked at it, but I was like, that doesn't mean anything. But now that you said it, "You all crowned me your king. I never wanted it. I never asked for it, but I accepted it because the North is my home. It's part of me, and I will never stop fighting for it." So that could be bullshit.
Interesting, yeah.
But then again, it goes on, no matter the odds, but the odds are against us. So there's a couple buts there, but I don't know. Don't like that first butt, though.
Hey, there's a couple butts in the Grey Worm Missandei scene, too, so.
There is.
Oh, don't worry. We'll get to that, DJ.
Yeah,
don't you worry, my friend.
I don't. If
Uh,
anybody wants to jump in, let me know. There's only one other note for the crypt scene I have to make, but go
I
ahead.
don't have one for the crypt scene, but I have one for the balcony scene.
Okay. Yeah, you go first because that scene is earlier anyway.
Sorry. Excuse me, Pepsi. When Davos takes the note, he gives us once again, which I love D&D doing this sort of stuff. He gives us a lesson in how to read even just a simple letter. Jon reads it, Sansa reads it. When Davos reads it, he says, besides there's a casual mention of dragons and
A horde of Dothraki.
Unsullied and Dothraki, like just nonchalantly. But what's really being said in that letter is, I have a shitload of power. So get over here and bend the knee to me. Which I just enjoyed Davos being representative of the reader, someone who didn't know how to read, now can read and points out the subtleties in how to read. And other thing I noted was everybody's respect for Tyrion, both Jon and Sansa, both have respect for Tyrion. That's it for me.
Actually, there was another ham-fisted exposition in this with Davos too, where he says, "Fire kills whites." What breathes fire? And I just thought that was kind of a little bit ham-fisted too, or it was sort of in your face.
I noticed Dragonstone. You mean that's not right in our face? Like, a castle named after the stone
Right.
that's used to kill the whites. Oh shit! There's a mountain of dragon glass there. Yeah, sure.
Yes. Sometimes I wish, and it's tough because I'm not a casual viewer, but sometimes I wish the showrunners would trust their audience to pick up on things like that a little better. Like they don't need to spell it out exactly.
And if they do, they can do it a little bit better, especially than Davos and Missandei. I mean, those two were overtly like, here you go.
Yep.
Spelled
Exposition.
out.
Yep. Exactly. The last note I wanted to make on the crypt scene specifically was about the Catelyn stuff, because Littlefinger brought up, and in the books we see it from Catelyn's perspective, Catelyn's fear that Jon as a bastard would someday try to usurp power in Winterfell. And essentially, although he didn't usurp it, obviously, but in a way, her fear came true.
Yes.
And I thought that was kind of interesting that Littlefinger remarked on that. And that Littlefinger knew as much as he did about that situation was kind of interesting.
You're right. I did pay a note to that. I didn't write any notes, but he's actually wrong. Like, Catelyn didn't underestimate him. This was always Catelyn's fear. She knew that what's happening could come to fruition. So I thought that was rather interesting. Yeah.
And the other thing I noticed is when Jon pushed Littlefinger against the wall and choked him, I noted two things. One was he didn't actually hit Littlefinger until the last line Littlefinger said about Catelyn again.
Yeah.
It was, when he said, like, I love your sister or whatever, Jon looked annoyed, but then he said, just as I loved Cat. And that's when Jon seemed to get pissed. And when Jon was choking him, it almost looked like he was not there, like he was in a fugue state or something. And I just wonder if that was, reminds me of Beric Dondarrion forgetting himself after he's been resurrected. I just wonder if there's some part of Jon that is now missing. It just seemed like a purely intense hatred at that moment, and he wasn't even thinking about it.
Well, I think possibly it's a good point, and this is just because of what you just said. Arguably, it's because it reminds him of his bastardity.
I like that word.
It's little. Yeah, it is a good word. It just rolls off the tongue, so to speak, pun intended. If Catelyn, maybe Jon's heard some of the stories about Littlefinger and Catelyn, or the ones that Littlefinger likes to promote, and maybe he's assuming the reason Catelyn hated him because he's a bastard, and this Littlefinger, which he probably knows, was somebody in between Ned and Cat himself, so maybe that sort of struck up the anger in him. I don't know. It's just because an affair was sort of touched upon in any sort of way. Like, I loved your stepmom as opposed to your sister, and he's like, stay away from my fucking sister. But it was, you're right, absolutely. Catelyn was the
What set him
point that
off.
made John flip out. Did he?
Bastard did he?
Okay.
You guys have anything else on Winterfell?
No.
Deej?
Not really, but a quick thing. I wonder if Jon will be the second Stark who knelt to a Targaryen. You know, that's how the North got taken into the kingdom in the first place. I just wonder if he'll be going the same route.
Yeah, that will.
I've always found that really strange, just in the fact that Ned himself, and I've talked about this before, probably with you guys, always makes a point, or made a point, to say he never trusts anything a man says on bended knee, which is proposal aspects of that too are apparent, but as well, just like, what did the king who knelt do it for? Did he have other plans in doing it? Was he playing some sort of game, and this was a necessary step in it, or whatever? It's just always struck me as odd that Ned says this, being a Stark, and the person who's most known for it is a Stark also.
Yeah, and that's about all I got on Winterfell.
I believe King's Landing was the next scene. Is that correct?
Yeah, we split up Winterfell some, but after the first Winterfell scene was King's Landing.
You guys want to take the lead, or should I just go?
I'll take the lead off of this one because I don't have too much.
Go ahead.
But what I do have is just Cersei's rhetoric, and I thought it was brilliantly done if you listen to what she says to Tarly and the other lords. And it's just the words that she uses to describe everything that's happening. So she goes, the Mad King's daughter. She doesn't say Dany. She doesn't say Queen or anything like that. It's the Mad King's daughter. Then again, the Mad King's daughter. And she says savages, mindless, unsullied soldiers, which you find out later is not exactly true, Dothraki heathens. And then this is how Olenna rewards centuries of service and loyalty, which we'll play again with Jon. I'll get into that a bit later. Continuing on after that, she says, the Mad King again, horrors, his daughter, Mad King's daughter, brutality, crucified hundreds of noblemen. Like, just every word she uses is just complete rhetoric to get her point across to the lords that it's
every single description that she gave was just riddled with sort of pejorative connotations of the people who are coming over, and I think I agree that was the dialogue there was expertly written in my opinion.
What does pejorative mean?
It means like expressing contempt or disapproval.
Okay. Very good word. I was going to say negative, but I like pejorative better. Noted.
Yeah, she was Cersei was definitely laying on some thick xenophobia in this, and we see that later too, where Jaime is talking to Randall Tarly individually. They're pushing the xenophobia thing because that's the best chance they have at getting any one of these lords to join their side for sure.
It's interesting. It's interesting though that Tyrion is one step ahead because of course they've already planned that they won't be using foreign armies in the sack of King's Landing. So it's interesting to see the head to head.
Dany really lucked out with Euron in this case, though, because Euron took out essentially the route for the Greyjoys and Dorne to join forces. So all you really have as far as Westeros goes is the reach against King's Landing, and they're going to have to make up for that somehow with some of the Dothraki and the Unsullied and everything. I think they forced Dany's hand there.
Yeah, it was a huge blow. But we'll get onto the naval aspect of this episode later. But I agree with you, a huge blow to Dany's potential plans.
Yep.
Yeah, the other thing I had, because it's in here and it goes back to the King's Landing scene, when Cersei mentions this is how Olenna rewards centuries of service and loyalty. This goes back to last episode's argument, is this how you're going to reward those who betrayed you? Give them land? So Sansa's Cersei aspect is sort of apparent here. Sansa has the same arguments if she wants. Jon let through the wildlings. the foreign invader sort of thing. So she has the exact same argument, should she need it, that Cersei is just using to everybody else. Oh shit!
It's an interesting parallel with Jon, isn't it? Really, because Jon has done the almost identical thing to Dany, in the sense that he's gone past the land where Westeros seemingly ends. He's recruited people who have entirely different societal values to those of Westeros, and yet brought them in, and he's going to be using them to and use them to claim Westerosi land. So there's definitely a parallel between Jon and Dany there.
Not necessarily claim. Jon's reason for doing it, though, is defense.
Oh yeah, the motives are different, but I mean the act itself is very similar.
Yes, absolutely.
I would also draw a parallel between Sansa and Cersei, like going back to what you said. In last episode, I mentioned that Sansa's bodyguard, Brienne, is wearing the black armor just like Cersei's Kingsguard. So there seems to be some parallels being drawn both between Sansa and Cersei and Jon and Dany in that sense.
If you remember as well, DJ, there was also sort of a potential threading in of foreshadowing when Jon sort of said to Sansa, it almost seems as though you admire Cersei or something along those lines. So that's another thing you could add to that.
Yep.
I learned a lot from her. Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah.
I had something when you guys were talking and it flashed in and then I lost it, but it was a point. Hopefully it comes to me later on in this, but it's not. Anyways, I did notice though, just it doesn't mean anything, but the fires in the throne room, they're burning bigger now. It's getting cold out.
Interesting.
I didn't catch that.
They have the big flames happening.
I had one point, quite a minimal point on this scene. If you want me to just go for it.
Yep.
So I thought it was particularly interesting how this scene, at least in my view, really displayed the lack of experience that Maester Qyburn has with sort of the traditional duties of councilmen. So when the lords asked sort of the very fair question of what they were going to do about dragons, he simply responded with, I think it was, "We are working on a solution." That was it.
Yeah.
And I feel as though like he is very secretive and very withdrawn, and similar to Varys works from the shadows, which of course has its many benefits in the world of Westeros.
Well, there's...
However, just quickly, I feel as though, with the lords pledging their men to fight in a war that, on paper looks quite stacked against them, I think me personally would require slightly more than his word regarding how they're going to deal with 3 huge fire-breathing friggin' monstrosities.
The note I would make about that, tying in too, because when they were defending King's Landing against the Battle of Blackwater, they also kept the wildfire secret. And one of the reasons they do that, and I think the reason why they would do that in this case as well, is because you cannot risk, especially because they don't know the loyalties of these guys, you cannot risk that word getting out to Daenerys, right? If they told them about the ballistas and Dany heard about that, suddenly she can plan in advance against that, which takes a huge element of surprise there.
I completely agree, and I know the reason why he's withdrawing his plan, but I feel as though as a lord pledging men to fight in this battle, you'd sort of want to know how your men are going to deal with these huge dragons. But I don't get me wrong, I completely understand why he's done it. I'm just sort of pointing out that there's no sort of middle ground there.
Point though is he hasn't even told Cersei about it yet. She doesn't even know. She knows he's working on something, but she didn't even know what it was yet.
That is true.
Like he brings her down later to show it.
On that point, that Balerian's skull was immensely.
I actually have a funny
awesome
story about that. If you wanna,
move on.
No, a funny story about what Calum just said, the big Balerian skull. So I was watching this episode with my cousin, and when Randall Tarley steps forward and he says, "She has 3 full-grown dragons," I said to my cousin, I said, "No, she doesn't." Right? Because we know that these dragons can grow immense. I mean, we're talking huge. It's said in the books that they just keep growing, essentially. So I said, "No, she doesn't." And my cousin basically didn't believe me. He's like, "What are you talking about? Did you see the dragons?" And so when that crypt scene came up where they were down and they were going to see the dragon skulls, I realized that they were about to show Balerian's skull, and I said to my cousin, I'm like, still think they're fully grown dragons? And then it immediately cut to Balerian's gigantic skull with Cersei standing next to it. And he was like,
Awesome.
oh, okay, shit, no, that's that's way bigger.
So, because you brought it up, I was actually going to skip over this because I figured it was kind of a hard sell. But dragons represent fire-made flesh, correct? And the reason a dragon grows so big is because of the properties of fire themselves. As much as you feed them, the fire is going to grow and grow and grow until either you find something to put it out or you cut off the supply of whatever's fueling it, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
That's why dragons grow to no end. And then once they started being kept in dragon pits and things like that, they started getting smaller and smaller. Once they were tamed, they can no longer grow. That's the idea of the dragons, and the metaphorical idea of that is the dragons inside of you. What it is that drives you to do what it is that you're doing is what's growing, and it's not necessarily a good thing. The dragons in this instance are a bad thing, which I suppose we can all agree on because we know the damage that they're going to do should they be left to roam. But a dragon inside of you it's sort of, what do I have written here? It's what drives you to do your thing. It's what's driving Dany. She decided upon this mission once she got the dragons, and that's sort of what she's using to get it. And once her dragons die, I think she's going to come to this realization of, I wasn't exactly going about things that I wanted to do. I was fueled by something that wasn't the core of me as opposed to anything else. Anyways, that's all I had to say about that, seeing as you sort of touched on the size of them.
Actually, no, I really like that. Have you ever listened or read the poem Fire and Ice by
Yes, I have.
Robert Frost?
Yeah.
And there's, I know George R.R. Martin is a big fan of
Frost.
Robert Frost. Yeah, exactly. And in the poem, I don't need to read the whole thing. People can look it up unless you want me to. But
No, go for it. It's fairly short, isn't it?
it is really short. Yeah. All right, I'll read it real quick. So, Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. And I think, at least in the metaphorical side of this, fire represents desire, kind of like going towards what you're saying, and ice represents like hate in a way. And so I think those themes actually fit with some of the characters we see too. Like you said, Dany gets her dragons, and she is spurned by a desire. She goes forth with a desire to do the things she does, and I don't know. Maybe with Jon, it's kind of interesting. Like I said, when he lost himself choking Littlefinger, just sort of the icy hate that he had there.
Could be, or maybe also sort of Dany has the dragons, the Starks have the dire wolves, and that sort of reinvigorates what they think. Arya, which we'll get into later on, which I think will play into this, but apparently does not have her dire wolf anymore. We'll talk about that later, but that might be important as well. But yeah, no. And the other poem I would like to mention by Robert Frost is, we won't read it because it is a longer one, but it's The Mending Wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about two people on each side of a wall. And there's talk about spells and shit like that. It's pretty cool. Anyways, any thoughts on anything else in the...
I still got some more on this.
Go for it.
King's
Go for
Landing
it.
stuff. Okay. I thought an interesting line from Randall Tarley when Jamie first came over, and I do like Jamie mistaken Dickon for Rickard. You know, he mentions Rickard. I thought it was kind of a funny dig.
Rickard or Rickon? I thought he said Rickon.
Oh yeah, he might have said Rickon. Yeah, exactly. But I thought it might have been on purpose, to be honest with you, because you know they always talk about how the nobles learn these houses so thoroughly and everything. So I thought it might have been a little bit of a dig at Randall Tarley, but
I thought it was very, very Jamie-esque. Even when he's trying to suck up to him, he still did this. That's just,
yeah, and then he just sort of smiles and moves on. Yeah, exactly. I thought that was kind of funny.
I don't get
But a good line from Randall Tarley. He said, "When my queen summons, I answer the call. I've heard what she does to those who defy her, and I realize that you could apply that to Cersei or Dany."
Sure. Yep.
So I
Absolutely.
just thought that was an interesting note there.
But we can't apply that to John.
No.
Which is
Yeah,
interesting. as well.
yeah, that's true. Very true. Yeah.
Arguably, I guess John says though those kids did not defy him; it was their fathers, and they're dead. But same point, sort of.
And then as far as asking how you think this will go forward, you know, with Jamie talking to Randall, Jamie obviously, as we discussed, appealed to his xenophobia, the bigotry in general to try to spur him, but it didn't seem like it was enough, right? There was still something in Randall holding him back from just pledging, you know, his men to the queen. And I just wonder if you guys think it will be enough for Randall, or if you think he'll turn on.
I don't think that will be enough, but I think what solidified Randall's position in support of Cersei was the promise that he would be named Warden of the South.
Mm-hmm.
When he said that, there was sort of, I'm not sure if you guys noticed it as well, but I certainly noticed sort of a glimmer, and you could see the facial expressions change quite significantly when he was mentioned as a future Warden of the South, because obviously he holds his family in quite high regard, and he's a very proud man, and I think that definitely sort of plays into his desires as a character and as a person.
He's very much like Tywin, right? Tywin was obsessed with raising his family as high as they could do and maintaining it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think both of you said it perfectly well. As soon as that was said, that was the thing that pushed him over the edge. The xenophobia, he was, you know what, I'd rather not get burned by dragons. But hey, you know what? Maybe it's worth it if I can raise up the name of my house.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you guys know in the books or the show or whatever, because he does say Warden of the South, I believe. But don't they break it down by kingdom? Is it not Warden of the Reach, Warden of Dorne, two separate things?
I couldn't swear to
Yeah, I'm
it.
not 100% sure. I'm just curious.
Is there a Warden of Dorne?
No, I think the Warden of the South holds jurisdiction over the Southern Kingdoms. Is how I understand it. I could be wrong.
Brings up an interesting question of like, who was Warden of the South before this then?
Probably Tywin.
Was it not the Tyrell?
Wouldn't he be Warden of the West though?
No, it was the it was Olenna's husband, wasn't it not?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we can assume. I just brought that up. I'm not actually 100% sure.
It was Olenna's son. I'm fairly certain. Marjorie's father. I'm 99% certain that it was him. Maester Tyrell.
What was John Arryn?
Right.
He was
John Arryn.
No. But before that, I thought he was Warden of the Vale. Didn't they refer to Sweet Robin as, well, he cannot be Warden of the Vale. He's not an adult. We need to put somebody else up there, essentially. That's why I thought they broke it down.
No, he was Lord of the Vale.
But I believe, I'll go back and check this at some point. I'll make a note of this, but I believe
that you can also add in comments for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I believe Robert and Ned have a conversation about this, and if I remember correctly, I believe the language Robert uses is Warden.
There's no such thing as Warden of the Vale. It's Warden of the East, encompasses the Vale.
Okay, so I'd be interested to know again, still how this breaks down. Like, what does Warden of the East cover? Warden of the West cover? We know Warden of the North. I'm just curious. Is it saying that the Tyrells have some sort of jurisdiction over Dorne and the Stormlands? Then,
as far as I understand, it would be the case.
I don't know if they have any jurisdiction over Dorne. I can't see Dorne playing along with that.
That's exactly Dorne,
sort of like Texas or something like that. Even though it's part of the state, but it's like its own entity.
Your knowledge of America is
not fitting.
Dawn is a different jurisdiction to the south. So the warden who holds power over Dawn is called the Warden of Stoneway.
Interesting. Okay.
So let me read this. So Warden of the Stoneway is a Dornish title traditionally held upon the head of House Euronwood. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly.
Ironwood.
Ironwood, yeah, sorry. It indicates military seniority over other local lords in defense of the Stoneway.
That's interesting. So I wonder if the Stormlands do have their own warden then, and Warden of the South is specific to the Reach, in other words.
It could very well be. I'm not
We don't have
entirely
to look
sure.
into this right now. We can definitely.
And the
yeah.
Stormlands, though. But I guess the North itself is so big, and it's just called the North. What is
Right.
everything else is so different? It's the Westerlands,
Mhm.
the Vale,
Yep.
the Reach, and the Stormlands.
Riverlands.
So,
Yeah. But anyway, keeping up with King's Landing, we can go to the ballista scene, I guess, if you guys want.
Yeah.
I did note that in a way, we had two crypt scenes. We had the one in Winterfell, and we had the one here in King's Landing. You know, one housed the ancient line of Starks, and one housed the ancient line of dragons, or
Yeah.
ancient, but the line of dragons. And I thought that was kind of a cool parallel that we had two scenes like that, one of fire and one of ice in a way.
We have wolves with heads chopped off and a spike getting driven through a dragon skull.
Mm-hmm.
I made one note, which I'd just be curious. Did you guys make any notes at all about the scorpion or the ballista?
It was I believe that would be considered a ballista. Yeah. I had one question: where will they mount them?
Yeah, I wondered that too.
Hmm.
When I saw that, I thought it was a representation of Euron's ship. If you go back and look at it, it has like the wings, and it even has what we see later on, the front prow with the teeth that come smashing down. Like it has all.
Cool.
So I'm just looking at Euron also as part of Cersei's weapons against the dragon. I'm not saying whatever, but I do believe that it was supposed to bring apart that sort of feeling, or at least point that out, if you would. Like it just totally reminds me of the way Euron's ship looks if you were looking down on it from above.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point. Guys, give me 1 second. I just need to go to the toilet real fast.
Yeah, no worries. I'm curious as to what you, how important do you think the ballista are going to be going forward? Because I had an argument with one of my friends who thinks that this was, first of all, he thought the reveal was kind of weak. He wasn't that impressed by the ballista itself, which I can get. We've seen a lot of cool stuff, and I think it's actually kind of mired by the later Euron scene where you just see these, and I don't know what is going on, but these fireballs flying all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I think we sort of saw those last season when Marine was under siege too. Like they were launching these weird fireballs too, which seemed, I don't know what it is that they're doing it, but I enjoyed
trebuchet or something.
Yeah.
But it does. It. I guess the difference is that a ballista. First of all, it's essentially shooting a spear. It's not an arrow, right? The thing is huge. That device is gigantic.
Yeah. Well, we saw it'll decimate a dragon.
It's launching a spear, and he makes a note. Qyburn makes a note that spears are what seem to be damaging the dragons and Marine. So I think the ballista will be important, but my friends seem to be under the impression that it won't actually make that big of a difference.
I think they have one chance at it, right?
Well, if they only have one, I mean, if they have a bunch of ballista, that will be huge.
No, they'll have a bunch. I think they're not just going to have the one. They definitely will have a bunch, but even then, you have to hit once that's revealed.
Yeah,
then
the surprise.
Get behind them and maneuver away or stay right above them. I mean, I don't think they can shoot straight up. I mean, I don't know exactly, but I think they're just forward shooting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, once it's revealed, they can, and this is why I believe Qyburn held back the knowledge of them too.
Yeah, because
and
that was a really good
point. Once they're revealed, they're almost useless.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point.
Did you catch, by the way, that the Light of the Seven was playing during part of this scene? Light of the Seven was the song playing during.
I can't pick out. Oh no, that's
so it was the scene playing during Cersei blowing up the set. Yeah, it was the same piano score was playing.
That was the one song they said I would be able to pick out because it's so
yeah.
No, I missed that too.
Yeah.
I'm too busy concentrating on dialogue and weird things visually. Anyways, welcome back, Calum.
Thank you. Which are we still remaining on the King's Landing scene at the moment, or have you guys transitioned onto Grey Worm?
No, I have finished up with King's Landing. Yeah, we can move on to the second Dragonstone scene.
Gotcha.
second Dragonstone, but didn't we cover that already?
I thought we were.
Somewhat. There's at least one note I can make that I didn't
Go for it.
really go into, but we sort of talked a little bit about. Ilaria gives Tyrion a very interesting look when Tyrion knocks over the lions for Casterly Rock. And I'm just wondering if what's going through her head is either, oh, he really isn't like the other Lannisters, or whether she's considering that Tyrion might just want Casterly Rock for himself, and that might be a motivation for him. I wonder what is kind of going through her head.
That just makes an interesting point going forward in the story. Ilaria being captured now, and she knows Dany's plans.
Mm-hmm.
So she can reveal these things to Under the Mountain. I'm sure it's going to be the Mountain, or perhaps Qyburn's scrutiny, but what is it called when you gather information?
Interrogation.
Interrogation, that's the word I was looking for. Qyburn or the Mountain's interrogation techniques.
Tickling.
I feel as though it will be. I feel as though it'll be the suffering of Illyria's daughter that gets her to speak, as opposed to the torturing of her, because I feel as though these the fact that she was the one to poison Cersei's daughter, that can only be reciprocated and sort of replied with by torturing the daughter of the person who killed your daughter. And I think that'll be, because I don't think that she would speak that easily under interrogation, like general interrogation techniques. But I feel as though as soon as you start to bring the daughter into it and start, showing her suffering, I think that'll be the motivation for her to speak.
Is she the only one that's actually her daughter?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, Obara and Tyene are both not her daughters.
Just Oberyn's.
Or Nymeria, actually. Tyene was her daughter and was captured, yeah.
Okay. I found it. We'll get there. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only other thing, and this has nothing to do with this scene, but I was curious of two things, which is after they killed Doran Martell, is Ilaria considered the de facto ruler for some reason? And if that is the case, who's currently ruling Dorne right now? Like with Ilaria up north and all the Sand Snakes, who actually is running Dorne?
I think
Just
that's
something I thought of.
We're not supposed to talk about Dorne.
Yeah, that's a good point. Clearly, the show doesn't want us to talk about
Dorne. Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah. No. Good point though. Yeah. Who is running Dorne?
But yeah, that's about it. We can move on to Grey Worm and Missandei.
I think with the show, in many cases, sometimes you just have to accept that there's going to be missing points, because obviously there's a stringent on the time.
It's just like when I noted that Ed was running the Night's Watch, even though he wasn't elected. It's stuff I make notes of and I laugh at, but I don't take too seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't think that there's an actual teleporter or anything like that.
Speak for yourself.
Well, there is. It's glass candles, right? You just teleport you into someone's dreams.
There you go.
So Grey Worm Missandei?
Yeah. You want to take the lead on this one, DJ? Because I know you have quite some this scene.
No, I think I have the fewest notes, but when we had talked a little bit about this scene, it really did bug me on my first watch, and I still don't think it was a great scene, but at least the themes in it were really good. I just was upset a little bit that they spent as much time on it when they could have been doing other things I actually care about. But there was some good stuff here. There was definitely some good themes in the scene, and I'll let you guys talk about that because you guys brought them up originally. But one thing I did note, and I think you guys will like that, I picked up, was Grey Worm mentions he was never scared.
Mm-hmm.
And this reminded me, and we talked a little bit about this last episode, about how Sam is the bravest because he's always scared and always does what he needs to do.
Yes.
But if Grey Worm was never scared, is he ever brave? But he's scared now, so this is obviously an important moment for him. But just something I wanted to bring up there, I thought was kind of interesting.
No,
yeah, I personally, you want me to just shoot off on this MP and then we'll hand it over to you?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, DJ, I completely agree with sort of your overall sentiment to this scene in particular. However, I do think there are reasons why this scene exists and why it exists in the exact length and way that it came across. And I think that these reasons can sort of be boiled down to two main ones. Firstly, explicit scenes of all nature, including obviously sexual, have sort of become a trademark of this show for millions and millions of viewers. And this scene will have, without a doubt, in my view, will have had people talking about it, be it, you know, positive or negative. It will have had people talking. I mean, even us, who are huge fans of both the books and the show, when we got together to discuss first impressions, we were talking about it. Albeit we were talking about it negatively, we were still talking about it. And of course, you know, talk generates views, and views generates money, and so on. But the second reason is actually relating to the plot, which is, I feel as though we're all in agreement on this, but if you guys disagree, then please do pull me up. But I'm sort of the view that Grey Worm will absolutely die in the next episode, or at least, you know, insofar as he's sieging Castle Rock. And I feel as though this is because obviously you don't siege the heart of Westerosi power, such as Castle Rock, and not take considerable losses. And how better to resonate those losses with the viewers. You know, instead of having tons of nameless cannon fodder die, have a main character die. And I feel as though, you know, it's set up so when the news reaches Missandei,
it pulls at our heartstrings.
Yeah, certain viewers will empathize with her loss more so than if this scene had never happened. And I feel those two reasons in particular are my main
great point. Yeah,
to why that scene exists. MP, you wanna shoot?
Just going off that note, I mean, yeah, there is, if you want to get once again into semantics, and I know people are doing this, like every time a torch goes by, people think that it's somebody that's a Targaryen, but every time somebody says no one, now we think that it's represents death. Yeah. And when she says, you don't know when you're coming home, he says, no one knows. So perhaps that gives you credence that, yes, he is going to die. And that's the little bit of foreshadowing that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great prediction. I think it's likely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes sense. You're absolutely right, Calum. I mean, you need something, and the way DJ said, when it gets back, it pulls at Missandei's heartstrings, and perhaps she has this wondering, what are we doing, fighting and killing people, the people that I love, fighting somebody else's wars.
I'm not even sure if it'll go that far. I think it may do, and you may be absolutely right. But I feel as though it sort of adds another emotional level to it, because you'll have people who are sad because obviously one of their favorite characters is dead. But then you also have the next level of, you know, the person who dies isn't the person who suffers. It's the family and the loved ones of the person who dies that have to live with it. And I think that will resonate with a lot of viewers, and that scene sort of set up that the ability for that to take place.
There was a little bit of comedy at the very beginning of this scene, which was before Missandei, the first cut you get to it, Grey Worm sharpening his sword, which doesn't have weapons or metaphors for the penis. So that's, I thought it was good. I thought it was smart.
Can I mention one other note that I had related to, but also kind of funny, is once again, Game of Thrones has managed to avoid showing a dick. Even when they have the naked guy, they still can't. No, they literally can't even show it now.
I showed you those clips of that bar that was watching the show, and that scene, everybody was like, "Are they going to show it? Are they going to show it?"
Yeah.
Like, them all just waiting to see if they could see Grey Worm's whatever it is, his Grey Worm,
his Ken doll.
Yeah, his Ken doll. Anyways, aside from the fact that the Grey Worm's sword represents his dick, it also represents what he is. His whole purpose up until sort of Dany and this point, which I'll get into, is he's a weapon. That's who he is. He was raised to be nothing but a weapon, and it's not until Missandei and Dany come into his life that he thinks he's anything other than that, right? I thought that Missandei was, you know, doing her best to represent womankind. This is a joke, by the way, but as soon as Grey Worm says, "You're my weakness," she's like, "I'm your weakness?" She just doesn't. First thing he says is he insults her, and he doesn't wait for you know, his romantic speech. He's just like, "What?" Which I thought was funny. Don't hate me, women. I was just making a joke. He says,
"Don't get misogyny seeping through here."
Yes, he says, "Why are you leaving? Or why haven't you come talk to me?" And he says, "You know why." And she's like, "I don't." Yes, she does. But she just wants him to spell it out for her. Yes, my misogyny is apparent. He was.
Let's not get into feminism.
No, I'm just being an asshole, and I just thought it was comedic. I'm not saying that that's appropriate. I was just making it funny. Bravery, we spoke on that.
No comment on any of that.
Fuck off. His biggest shame, and he tries to stop her. This is the one thing he's afraid of. Like, his biggest shame is having his dick cut off. And he does allow her to look upon him and see what is probably his biggest fear in the world, the one thing. And the other note that I have is love is the death of duty, which again goes to perhaps why he will die, because now he is no longer strictly a weapon. He has something else to live for, which I thought. It was also reminiscent of soldiers going off to war, like World War II or whatever, and they have the big gala before they go off on their ships or whatever, and the soldiers always meet a girl and write their letters to him to get them through the war. I thought that was kind of he has something to live for, whether or not he'll live, but he knows that there's someone waiting for him when he returns, which is kind of cool. And then I have, for some reason, written down here at the very end, what does make a perfect soldier? And then I just said, there are none. You can't ever have a perfect soldier. Somebody...
A white.
Yeah, there you go. You're right.
I mean, perfection doesn't exist in any form of human endeavor. And even whites aren't perfect because they're susceptible to dragonglass and fire. And
well, but I think what he means more is on the psychological aspect.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely not. Whether or not they can be defeated, but... Yeah,
even an Unsullied can be turned by love, but a white has nothing. It feels nothing.
Yeah, correct.
So, I suppose, but some would argue that the fact that whites feel nothing isn't necessarily a positive in many cases, because sometimes it's like you hear stories about war and people's personal experiences with it, and a lot of times it's the adrenaline that got them through, and it's the adrenaline that helped them survive. And if they were just very much disinterested in it, or not really bothered, then
I don't think any of us argue that feeling nothing is a positive. I was just sort of...
Well, I would also say that with the whites, it's not so much that they are disinterested; it's that they can't have an opinion.
Yeah,
they're just solely driven by the will. So we think of in this case the Night's King, right? The Night King, yeah. So they don't have a choice. They're just bodies. They're just moving forward all the time. So they don't have an opinion on it one way or the other, really.
You could argue though that in many cases the sort of the infantrymen of many Westerosi armies are in the same boat. They don't get to have an opinion. They're just fodder.
I definitely think
they do have an opinion. They have to do it anyways.
But it doesn't matter.
But I do think the whites are supposed to be representative of that feeling. Metaphorically, it is very much like the soldiers, the nameless, soldiers who get sent out by their kings to just die on their behalf for something they don't know anything about.
And I think we're supposed to eventually realize that the whites are those people. That's who builds that's who eventually becomes their army. It's the people, the victims of war that become the army of the undead. Arguably, though, with that, they don't feel anything anymore. It's hard for me to rectify the fact that when the whites come, they do fight. They know how to swing a sword. So is this just muscle memory, or are they at some point thinking for themselves?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about that. I think, isn't it James who believes that the Night King can actually, in a way, control all of them at once? Like he's the most powerful skin changer.
Yeah, and they're a collective. They all have the knowledge of every person in the thing. So that sort of maybe plays somehow. It just seems odd that, and
George R. Martin does a lot with hive-mindedness in his sci-fi novels and everything too. So
I guess if it's sort of like a hive mind, and what they're seeing gets filtered through this sort of central thing, which we sort of perhaps that prism sort of deal that we looked at the last time, that controls all the others. You do have that knowledge, and they can sort of defend themselves without actually having free will.
I mean, you could relate it sort of to epistemology in the sense that they potentially have practical knowledge, but they don't have propositional knowledge. So they can't formulate a sort of opinions and knowledge on facts and whatnot. They're not cognitive beings, but they have the subconscious practical knowledge of, you know, how to run, how to swing a sword, and so on. So I think you could definitely link it to epistemology in that sense.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think I meant everything about Grey Worm there. I screwed up my points about Missandei. And for some reason, oddly enough, after we had the talk, it was the one episode or the one scene that I watched over and over again for some reason. I'm not sure why that was.
Yeah, so weird. I did also make a note that they both have beautiful butts.
Yeah, so the other joke I was going to be was, oh, guess what I saw in that scene? And it was Missandei's hourglass shape and representative of time and everything. That I was going to be an actor.
I think maybe you're digging a little too deep on that.
Yes, I know. I skipped it. It was supposed to be purely a joke, but yeah. I was just like, holy shit, that's an hourglass figure, man. That was crazy.
It's far from Duncan to dig too deep into topics.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
we've never known Duncan to dig deep into topics.
Never at all. Never. All right, moving on.
Yes,
Citadel?
I think so, yeah.
Just one quick point that's not even related to the plot, but I think we can all agree, and I'd be very surprised if anyone disagrees with this, but it's happened in the past, which is just how incredible Ian Glenn's performance was in the operation scene.
The shaking and everything.
Yeah, it not only the visible performance, but also the audible performance. Like some of the noises that he was making was incredible. He really relayed the intensity and level of pain that his character was sort of enduring in that moment, and I just felt as though it was brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway, that was a side point.
A great actor in general. I mean, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Definitely.
Who wants to jump us off here?
My notes are quite minimal in this, so you guys can take it away.
Actually, I think that's a good reason for you to start if you want.
Calum?
No, go ahead. I can bounce off you guys.
All right, fair enough.
I'll go. So first thing I got from this scene was it reminded me of Qyburn when he cuts off Jaime's hand.
You're talking about the actual surgery, right?
No, even just the first thing that said is the infection is spread too far. You should have cut off your arm the moment you were touched. But yeah, the surgery itself reminded me of Jaime, but that was when we first talked. Going back, and this even adds a bit more to it. When Qyburn pours the boiling wine onto Jaime's stump, he says to burn out the infection before it spreads, which is, again, sort of Jaime's ego was, centered around that hand being the greatest swordsman in Westeros and blah, 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 blah. That was his identity, was that hand, which is something that corrupted him. It formed who he was, and once that changed, he had to become a different person, which we get in the way that he's less and less like Jaime. So in regards to Jorah, I feel like when Sam does the surgery to him, it's representative of the same sort of corruption that spread through him, which is him always being devoted to the woman. Like, first of all, it was his first wife. He was always trying to please her. Then she wanted more and more and more, and then he started slaving and everything like that. And then it became Dany when he became obsessed with Dany. And when Sam plucks away at it, the first place that they do it is actually this side, over top of the heart. I mean, the heart's technically not on the left, but it's represented by being on the left. It's actually center leaning left, but and when he rips it off, that's when you get Jorah's magnificent scream. And so I'm assuming Jorah's going to get cured at some point. I mean, I find it hard to believe that he's not going to be cured, but I think he'll have a different view upon Dany at this time. He'll have had his cathartic moment, and become who he should be, like his proper. He'll live for himself rather than for somebody else.
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff.
I like that.
That's my first little bit about the surgery.
What would you do if they just opened the next episode with Jorah's corpse? They were like, gotcha.
Well, that goes to Grey Worm. If he dies, he dies.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
If he dies,
if
he
you
dies.
don't lose the okay, Drago.
I was hoping one of you would have understood that reference. Otherwise, it may have been somewhat awkward.
Yeah. But when Grey Worm talks about when they were making the perfect soldiers and sending him up the cliffs or fear of water or whatever they throw him in, if he drowns, so be it. I mean, you have
either way, strong, unsullied.
You're stronger because you've accomplished something. You've overcome something, which Jorah's overcoming his sort of thing.
Just to pull it back to, I brought up between Varys and Dany, the possible reason Varys and Illyrio sold her off. By overcoming her being sold off to Dothraki horse lords and everything, I mean, that was what made her as strong as she is now. So conflict definitely breeds the ability to overcome. If you don't, maybe you die off. But if you do overcome it, then you are that much stronger afterwards.
Yeah. What's the standard saying? That which doesn't kill me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What
is dead may never die actually kind of ties into that a little bit too. So
yeah, I can see what you're saying. Very good. I like that. I really like that. Any more on the actual surgery?
Nothing on the surgery for me. I had a very minor point on the overall, but if you DJ have a point to make on the surgery, then
I've got a few points. If you want, go ahead. Yeah. We'll hear you out first. No problem.
Mine is relating to the later scenes of the Citadel. So if you want to talk about surgery, then go ahead.
Oh well, actually, the surgery is the later scenes.
Oh really?
Well, the first scene is Sam and Ebros looking at Jorah, and then there's some time in between.
I jumped into it because
I can just sort of relay my my point, which is that this has been sort of a recurring theme within the Citadel scenes, which is sort of the contradiction of the Citadel's purpose, which is obviously the pursuit of knowledge. Whereas it seems to me, there's many cases of this, but it seems to me that the guy who's supposedly in charge is very he's very cut off when it comes to sort of pursuing knowledge. He's very he writes off a lot of information. So Sam is what you'd expect from a Maester, very interested in sort of furthering or progressing his knowledge of a certain field, whereas the Maester's very much if it hasn't worked, then it doesn't work, sort of thing. And I felt like that was sort of embodied by how he said that when Sam was talking about a particular Maester that had studied into the potential cures of grayscale, he sort of wrote that off by saying that particular Maester died of grayscale. Well, of course, just because someone died of a specific disease, it doesn't make his study into said disease any better or worse. Maybe he was onto something when he was studying it, but he could obviously, because he died and his time was limited by the disease, he couldn't finish what he started. But it still doesn't prove that the study that he did do while he was like a cognitive being is any less profound or useful to this situation.
I would expand that even further, and I would make a note that, and it was Archmaester Pylos who wrote that book that Sam was talking about.
Yes.
If he got grayscale, if he's the only one that could do the treatment, who treats him? You know what I mean? So if he had not quite passed that knowledge on yet, then the reason he might have died is because nobody else would treat him for it.
I'm not necessarily even certain that he's the one that uncovered this cure for grayscale. He might have just expanded on it, and it failed when he did it. He might have recorded it.
He doesn't fail, though. Sam says too successful.
Too successful. I'm going to get into that, but it doesn't mean that Pylos was the one that made those successes. He might have just, when he was writing his book about cures or whatever the book's called,
he might have mentioned them.
Pylos in the books is Crescen's replacement.
Yes, right? I was going to bring that up myself. Yep.
Can I just quickly like add on to what I was saying? very quickly, and then I'll hand it over to you guys, because it's just a very small point, which is this exact dialogue that we're discussing plays into my earlier point about the Archmaester being very black and white. So if you compare, so obviously what he's implying by the fact that Maester died from the disease he's studying is that the cure that he was working on isn't successful, right? But that's not, cures aren't black and white. So obviously I can relate this to a disease in our life, which obviously cancer. So chemotherapy, is often used to treat cancer. It doesn't work in 100% of cases. It doesn't always cure cancer, but it gives patients a really good shot. And in that sense, it just sort of speaks to his sort of profound ignorance on many topics. Again, he sort of alluded to this in the previous episode, but in this scene in particular, that his mind is very closed, whereas Sam's is very open. And I found that was quite an interesting comparison between sort of the student and the master.
And I'd even make a further note, which is that Ebros, the maester we're talking about, is the Archmaester for the Silver Link, which is the arts of healing. It's like he doesn't even give a shit, He knows what he knows and he's moving on. It's that.
Yeah,
That's it.
he forged his link. He's the healer, and then he stopped sort of trying to figure anything out. What he's learned is what he practices, which I think is like a lot of doctors, right? I mean, I just took my mom to the doctor, and she went and saw a doctor, female doctor, and she was like, I've never seen that before. Here's some this and that, and good luck. It's interesting. Doctors tend to
specialize.
Well, even specialize or stop growing in a sense. They've gone through their school and their studies, and yeah, I suppose in general context, they're not specializing in increasing their knowledge in different ways, but a lot of it's just skills.
I totally agree. I'd actually say there's a way to sort of see how important a scientist's work is in once they get their PhDs and everything, and it's to see how many papers they have produced outside of school, and then see how many people cite those papers, right? Those are two metrics you can use to determine if a scientist is doing important things or is continuing their advancement of human knowledge.
We also have that sort of referenced in the dialogue here, right, on how to get people to read those papers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, so if you want, if that's for you guys, I can talk a little bit about some of the random rabbit hole I dropped down on this scene.
No,
go right ahead.
Nothing crazy conspiracy, but just I started wikiing some of the people that were mentioned in it. I noticed that the book that Ebros hands Sam is the Lannister history book, history of the House of the Lannisters, and I wonder if maybe could that be important in some way? I mean, obviously we know that they're heading to Casterly. Dany's crew is heading to Casterly Rock at some point. So Sam having this knowledge, will this be meaningful? Is there dragon glass in the mines under Casterly Rock? Maybe, something like that. I also noticed that one of the books Ebros mentioned by Maester Chevalthin, I don't know how to pronounce that, Chevaliathan or something.
Tyrion taught us what.
Yeah, he did. That's right. I'm glad you remember. Yeah, I know it's something. Everything after that, I don't remember. So Chevaliathan. I wrote it down. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he's also famous for writing an history of the great sieges of Westeros. So again, he's mentioning books that seem to be topical to stuff that may be happening in the short future here. A history of the great sieges of Westeros. Will that be important to Casterly Rock or sieging King's Landing, etc.?
Sure, very cool.
I did make a note about Pylos being in case anyone missed it, he was the maester in the books. Pylos is the maester who takes over after Crescent tries to poison Melisandre. So just an interesting nod to that. Obviously very different characters. This one's an archmaester.
Yeah, he's dead already. I mean, I guess, well, we never had Pylos in this show, right?
I don't Wait, didn't we? Yes, we did. Didn't we have? No, you're right. We didn't. I'm sorry. No, I think you're right.
Thought Crescent just died, and that was sort of the end of the Maester.
I was just wondering who was teaching Shireen and Davos to read, but I think just Shireen taught Davos to read, if I remember now in the show.
Yeah, Shireen absolutely taught Davos.
Yeah. I had a quote I liked when Sam said to Ebros, "Can I have a moment?" And Ebros responded with, "This is your moment. Use it wisely." And I thought that was a great little, I mean, you could read into that forever. You could just start pulling random things, but just a good line.
Oh,
you're going to? Did you make a note of this one too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. Excellent. Yeah, I definitely want to hear your thoughts. I think I might choose that as my quote of the episode. It's kind of subtle. There's nothing really huge about the quote, but I just thought it was just a great little quote to in a Sam scene. You can jump off that if you want.
Okay, I guess I'll start with the 2 recorded cases of grayscale being cured. And this is a hybrid thought of mine or theory of mine between the books and the show, which is we know in the show 2 of Craster's daughters had grayscale. Correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Gilly
My theory is those are Valendala from the books. We don't have them in the show, but they exist in the books. And in the books, they're deathly afraid of grayscale. I think the reason that they're deathly afraid of grayscale is because they had grayscale. We know that Valendala were Craster's daughters because of Sam saying, or arguably, unless Sam screwed up, saying that Dala's baby, or Bal's baby, I can't remember which one, is Mance's son and Craster's grandson. So we know that they're related to Craster. So, it's kind of like this logic puzzle where you put the pieces together, but if they're deathly afraid of grayscale in the books, we have to know why. And so I did some Googling and research, and Maester Willis, the Maester who spent 3 years in Hardhome, was a healer as well. So perhaps he was the one that wrote the official book about the 2 cases of grayscale that were recorded and cured, and maybe arguably ice has something to do with it. Maybe it works better there, and that's why Pylos died. Maybe it happened beyond the wall. And what else? Then after Willis came back and partook in something called the Illuminations, which I can't figure out what the Illuminations is. So if anybody can tell me what the Illuminations is in the Citadel, what books or whatever it was that they were doing represent, let me know. But after that, he returned back to Eastwatch by the Sea, or he was last seen looking for a ship to take him to Eastwatch by the Sea, and then he vanished. He disappeared, that Maester. He just falls out of history. But he was quoted as being a healer and a counselor for the people beyond the wall. So my argument is those 2 were the cured case, and that's who Sam's talking about in this book.
I have to admit my ignorance on Maester Willis. I know the name, but I don't. It's with a Y, I think, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I know the name obviously, but I don't really remember much about it. I will have to look into that.
I only have it from the. I remembered it from some of the stuff I read in the World of Ice and Fire. I don't know if he's even mentioned in the books themselves, but the World of Ice and Fire he is, and that's why I had it jumped out in the back of my head. Actually, because I dug into it once they said 2 cases, and I already had this theory sort of building up about Valendala because of what the show's given us. That's why I sort of looked into it. Speaking about Ebros, interesting fact again, Ebros, or Ebro, is a river in Spain, I believe, that Hemingway writes about, and Ebros being a healer, when Hemingway writes about it, it's a river that represents life, or the bushes that grow on one side of it represent life, and on the other side, death. They're playing in, I don't know. I did an essay on it once in school. That's why I know this. But him being a healer and dealing with life and death, I thought that was an interesting sort of name for him to have. The stuff that he says, this Pylos probably, or whoever, someone was a dreadful writer, but an excellent researcher. This guy was a brilliant scientist or stylist who invented half the stories he'd tell.
Yep, Maester Fall.
Yeah. My opinion on that is just because this guy was a brilliant stylist and invented half the stories he told doesn't mean that the messages that he was actually writing about aren't conveyed in the stories, that there isn't a truth within these fictional accounts that this guy made up to get his point across, which I think basically we're talking about George here with research and the style that he's put into these books.
I can speak to that if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Maester Fall, who is the guy who apparently had great style but made up a lot of stuff, is mentioned one other time in the show. And it's when Sam and Maester Aemon are sitting down. It's actually going back to something familiar. The scene where Aemon says, "Love is the death of duty." So kind of interesting. But Maester Fall wrote about wildlings, and Maester Aemon says, "I can assure you the closest Maester Fall got to the wildlings was this very library," he said. And Sam said, "But the things he's writing are true." So going to exactly what you said, it's true that he was probably over-exaggerating a lot of points and making some stuff up, but there's definitely a kernel of truth in that.
Gotcha. Awesome. Love it. Like it when things mesh together.
Love it when a plan comes together.
Exactly.
Did I say that last week too? I feel like I did.
Maybe. You've definitely said it before once during this. I don't know if it was last week, but I've definitely heard you say it. Yep. When's that? A-Team, right?
Yep.
Hannibal.
Max and Paddy's Road to Nowhere. You guys might not know that, actually.
Yeah. Who?
There's a series. Have you heard of Peter Kay?
No.
Oh, damn. Must be a UK thing. Continue.
Okay.
Google Max and Paddy's Road to Nowhere. It's a really funny show.
To be able to write histories, Tarly, you need to do the research. If you want people to read your histories, you need a little bit of style. This goes to what we were talking about, I think, last week, or maybe it was just us in private, about the video that I had about the theory that Sam is actually writing the Song of Ice and Fire. This is his I hate it when I can't say the word chronology of the events. And just because he's a character in it doesn't mean that he's not writing about himself being in the story and what's actually happened to him, right? Which, okay, hold on. I just want to throw, if that theory is true, kudos to whoever came up with that, because it's brilliant.
I feel as though that it's impossible for that theory to be true.
I thought so too, but this makes me think a little bit more. It's just how we deal with it. But anyways, explain, both of you, DJ first and Calum.
Oh, no, you know what, Calum, go ahead.
Well, I feel as though it's impossible for the Song of Ice and Fire to have been written by Sam, purely because there are scenes in which only one character is present. And so for Sam to know that, one of two things needs to be the case. He either needs to possess powers similar to Bran, in which he can observe, scenes that are taking place in which he isn't privy to, or every single character in the book has relayed what they did at every single given moment to Sam. Sam just purely cannot know the extent of everything that has happened in the books. It would not be possible for him to. And even if you concede, even if I concede that the Maesters are all coming together and ferrying information to Sam so that he can write this book, it still doesn't explain scenes in which only one member of one character is present.
But that was just addressed right now, which is, DJ and I just spoke about it. the style of writing doesn't mean that they have to be true as long as the messages are in the story. So what we're reading doesn't necessarily have to be factual. It just has to contain the overall things that he wants people to pull out of the book.
Yeah, I think it's pushing it a bit personally, but that's fine.
Me too, but I still think it's an interesting thought
I just,
process.
my opinion, I argued against it too, and I still want to. The fact that we have Bloodraven last season telling Bran that the ink's already been written,
already dry.
and it's already dry, and you cannot go back and change it. So we know that reference is referring to offhandedly the Citadel and this big book that they keep that records the events. Not specific details and anything like that, but just a general accumulation of events that are occurring within Westeros. And I don't know if it's that far of a stretch to say that Sam fictionalized a lot of the story, but he's also in it, right? And I wonder if we can think about, I haven't read it fully yet, but the Dance of Dragons storyline, or the Queen's, what's that?
Princess and the Queen?
Princess and the Queen, how it's read very...
like a history.
Like a history, but yet there is sort of personal notes that people wouldn't be able to read, and yet it is written by a Maester, right? Just with maybe perhaps a little bit less style.
Yeah, they attribute like emotions to the characters and everything.
Yeah.
It's not typical of just a pure factual history.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my argument there. I tend to argue against it as well, but I can also sort of see it happening, and it seems to be, there's clues pointing towards it. And so then I had, and here we have the end of the series, Sam having written the story of Ice and Fire, and to add to that, I will say, Ibros says to him, which DJ mentioned, "This is your moment, Samwell Tarly. Use it wisely." So that sort of puts him in the midst of what he's about to do, perhaps. That maybe he is the guy writing it. I don't know.
And in a way, it actually, I think, spurs it urges Sam to go through with his plan to try to cure Jorah.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely an interesting little quote.
And also another thing with Sam is he is, at this point in time, the most traveled person aside from Euron in the story.
Yeah, and Euron, a lot of that is, we have to assume it's not necessary.
It's all assumption, correct.
Right. But we've seen Sam's
on the wall, down into Essos, up to, he's made the rounds.
I want to make a note to here of going back to what Calum was talking about, how frustrating these maesters are, how close-minded they are. How frustrated I was when Ebro said to Sam, you need something beyond fact, right? You need some kind of style so that people will actually read them. He said, "I'm not writing this book for nobody to read it." And then when Sam suggests something more poetic for the title, he says, "We're not poets." And it's so self-defeating. It's like so contradictory.
Yeah. I had that written down as well.
He just seems like an asshole. What a bad teacher. But the only other note on this scene is how disgusting the edit was between cutting into Jorah into the hot pie. I was like, oh god, so gross.
I liked it.
No, I liked it. It was just disgusting.
I knew that it wasn't Jorah anymore. I knew it was a transition. I was able to figure it out when I first watched it, but I didn't realize that it was going to be Arya and hot pie. But
a little too much crunch, I think.
Good luck to anyone tucking into food at that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's far better than the fucking poop soup.
Shall we use that as a transition into our discussion on the Arya scene as well?
Unless somebody else has something to say, yeah. Let's do it.
Arya's good.
I can kick us off from the first line.
Go right ahead.
Scene if you want, because it's the guy who's eating the pot pie, and he says, "They say her dragons are bigger than Aegon's," and the other guy says, "Cersei's just trying to scare us." And I thought this was kind of dumb, because I'm like, why would Cersei spread that lie when, one, she just had her, she had Tarly and all those other guys there and didn't even bring up the dragons at all. And two, it seems like spreading that lie, right? Their dragons are as big as Aegon's, would actually hurt her more than help her. People would be more, more apt to go to Dany's side if they think she has 3 dragons the size of Balerion the Dread. They'd be more likely to go to Dany's side than Cersei's. So I wonder if maybe somebody else is spreading that lie.
It's actually, I just want to touch on that really quick, which goes to what I was saying about how she chose her words so specifically. Pointed out, she never mentions the dragons. Mm-hmm. It's not until
Tarly
does it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like, Cersei took such a position in what she was saying to them and what she was leaving out. It wasn't until somebody forced her hand that she had to talk about it.
And even then, if you recall, it wasn't Cersei that spoke on it; it was Qyburn. So Cersei still didn't speak on it, even when questioned.
Absolutely.
I did not recall that, but yeah.
So she.
Anyways, yeah. Go ahead, Calum. I thought you were about to say something.
So my sort of thoughts on this scene is firstly that I think it was extremely interesting because I feel as though it showed and allowed us to delve deeper into Arya's mind than we perhaps have been able to ever. And I think what the result of that was for me was that Arya is more no one than we first perhaps thought. And I think this is backed up by two elements of this scene and the next. I'm going to be jumping between this scene and I'm going to basically be encompassing all of the Arya scenes in this point. But you guys can feel free to stick in with the pie scene.
I'm good to go with both.
But so the first element of these scenes, which I feel as though backs up my assertion that Arya's lost her sort of inner self and has actually sort of transitioned towards no one more so than we thought, was she seemed, to me, at least in my estimation, very, very cold and unemotive when conversing with Hot Pie. It was almost as though she cared more about the food than she did about Hot Pie. There was no sort of intimacy there in any sense, in my personal opinion. And again, I'm not qualified to make that assertion, but from my opinion, it definitely seemed that way. And then the second that he mentioned something about Jon, she was out of there straight away. There was nothing keeping her there. Previously Arya felt very close to Hot Pie, and I just felt as though that wasn't resonated in this scene. And then my second point on this is relating to Nymeria refusing to come home with Arya, and I feel as though that's a representation of Arya herself. So when Arya says that's not you, it's not just a reference to her conversation with Ned in season 1, but it's also she's also talking to herself as opposed to talking to Nymeria. So she's saying that going back to Winterfell and playing happy families is not who Arya is anymore. She's lost all of the emotional connection to House Stark, in my opinion. The only thing that you could argue is connecting her to her past identity as a Stark is Needle. But remember, it was Jon who gave her Needle. And as far as we can see, Jon is not a full Stark. He's more so a Targaryen. And so that would even if that is the case, that would therefore still break that connection even more so. And I don't see any connection that she has to House Stark anymore. And I feel as though that does imply her sort of. So
do you think she's going to turn around and head back towards King's Landing then?
Oh yeah, she's definitely not going to Winterfell, in my opinion. Although I could very well be proved wrong, but I don't think she will be.
I actually tend to agree with you, but the one note I'll make too is going back to what you said about her relationship with Jon is Jon's also heading south. So it actually works out perfectly. She may still very well meet up with Jon.
Are you saying this is after she's returning back to King's Landing, after she did make the decision to go north, right? We all know that she did decide to go
she was heading up to Winterfell, ran into Nymeria. Now she's turning around.
Then after meeting Nymeria, you're assuming that she's going south again.
Yeah, when she said that's not you, she's talking to herself, sort of saying, going home and playing happy families in Winterfell isn't who she is anymore. And I feel as though she's got a mission, she's got an agenda, and now she's realised that that's what she needs to carry out. And I feel as though she's definitely going to turn back and go to King's Landing. But I could be wrong. So we'll have to wait and see.
I'll let DJ talk about what's actually been said about this, which I think you're going to, DJ.
What's been said about what? As in,
earlier, the throwback to Ned and all that.
yeah, the inside the episode mentioned
Yeah.
the scene, and Calum mentioned it too, but just for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure that's almost nobody watching this, but it's a reference to the conversation where Ned and Arya were sitting down talking about how Arya should be, you know, a lady who marries and has kids for a lord and all this stuff, and she essentially said, "That's not me. That's not who she is, and she doesn't want that." And so, yeah, that line was, I think, like Calum said, though, more than just a reference to that scene. I think it was important to say where Arya is right now in her head. So,
Okay, so here's my arguments. I suppose I'm going against probably both of you because I don't think she's going back to King's Landing. The setting of this episode is the crossroads. This is where Arya makes her choice. She's at the crossroads. This is the inn at the crossroads. For those people who haven't read the books, this is the same inn where Catelyn captures Tyrion in episode or season 1, pulls the wool over his eyes, and then takes him up to the Vale, and then reveals, "Haha, I fooled you." So the symbolism of crossroads is you're at a place where you have to make a choice, right? I think she makes that choice. I believe she's still going to see Jon. I think she made that loud and clear. What's happening with the wolves is that Nymeria has been freezed for so long. She's no longer entitled to follow Arya just because Arya wants Nymeria to do so. That's not you. I admit that originally I thought she was sort of listening to or interpreting Nymeria's own words, and that's what Nymeria was saying to her. That's not you, Arya, and I was kind of in agreement with you guys, but talking about this a lot. The other thing that happened here is Nymeria does what Arya did to Nymeria, which is she turned her back on Arya, whereas before Arya threw stones and sent her off into the world her own, Nymeria is saying, you have to go on your own and figure out your shit yourself without me. But I do agree with you that she doesn't have the sort of ties to the Starks as she used to. And I also feel like the wolves that were shown were representative of the Stark wolves in general. Like there was a white one, there was a black one, there was, Grey Wind, and there were a couple others. But I think basically the ones that we saw close up were representation of the entire wolf pack. And Arya doesn't have a connection with them anymore. They were all sort of snarling at her. It was only Nymeria that sort of saved her. Which in the books as well, we have the crypt scene where Arya is the one that stabs Jon, or hits Jon anyways, when he's painted up like a white, right? In flour, he's got the flour over him, and Arya is the one that smashes him and says, "Don't worry, it's only Jon."
Yeah.
Whether or not that there's a friendly connection there and it was all fun and games, or if that's foreshadowing Jon becoming something of a more darker person, but yet Arya still realizing that, you know what, it's only Jon, he's still our brother. I don't know. Before we get on, I'll let you finish, DJ. I just love the fact that Hot Pie is always talking about the secret to the gravy. Things with many ingredients. It's all just sort of writing humor.
Yep. Yeah, he asked if she's made any pies. She says 1 or 2. That was pretty good.
Instead of pot pies, it's actually plot pies. Is what George is describing. I like the armor joke, the throwback to him thinking that all knights wore armor, and if you're a knight, you wear armor, and that's why he thought Brienne was a knight.
Yep.
And then we talked about this before, but and I know what I misinterpreted when I said that. I thought Hot Pie said Yuri. He's like Yuri, and that's who. It's you, Ari, that he says together really quick. So Ari is. I do think Hot Pie is actually going to survive the show, though. I don't think we'll ever have a camera scene with a dead Hot Pie in it.
I do like Hot Pie a lot. He's such a great character.
He's a self-professed survivor, so yeah, it would contradict that.
I don't know. I think
Did
so.
you guys take any additional significance to that particular quote where he labels himself as a survivor?
I did. I mean, one note I'll make is he keeps referring to her as Ari, even though he knows her name is Arya now. I just thought that was kind of interesting. But
Does he actually? Well, I guess sort of he does.
he keeps calling her Ari. Yeah. Oh, I should note I watched the show with subtitles, so I can confirm.
Oh no,
that
I knew he
does
was
call
calling her Ari. I just didn't know if he actually knew that her name was Arya.
Oh, I mean, he talks about how Jon Snow's her brother. He knows who she is now.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, you're probably right. It is Arya now, but I guess I wouldn't change calling you DJ if you told me your name was Tom all of a sudden. By the way, is it?
No, it's David. But okay, yeah. You want me to launch into some things now?
Oh,
Go right ahead.
one last thing that I noted is apparently, and I don't know if this is the first time you've ever gotten a general reference, but those guys speaking as Arya comes out of the inn, it's 200 miles from the crossroads to King Landing. So if anybody wants to, I don't know if we can take that as canon, but judge how the map works, I would go with that. It's the first time I've ever heard.
You know, that's interesting though, because I would wonder why they would write that instead of just saying we got a long trip before we hit King's Landing. They could have just as easily said that.
They did say that in the inn. They said, "Oh, it's a long ways away," but when they're coming out, they actually
they give a specific number. Yeah,
true. Anyways, that is it. That's all my notes on this. So go for it.
All right, I'll start with the fact that I think a lot of people, when we first mentioned this scene too, I think we were sort of like, this was Arya and the hot pie interaction just felt really strange. But I think that what Arya reminds me the most in certain parts here, when she grabs the food, when she grabs the ale and drains the whole glass at once, she reminds me of the Hound a lot during this scene. It reminds me of the whole I'm going to need every last chicken in here scene and everything. So I thought that was kind of interesting. She seems to have picked up some of his mannerisms. But I cannot agree more, Calum, how cold and just unemotional. She played the scene very well, just blankly staring forward. You know, Hot Pie's conversing with her. It's an old friend. And she just has no emotional reaction. The only time she has an emotional reaction is when he mentions Jon Snow, and it's just for a moment. Even when he admits that he's the one that pointed Brienne in her direction, she pauses, but there's no like emotional reaction on her face before she says, "She found me." You know, it's just there's just nothing. It's just like dead. It was such a bizarre scene, I think. I think the most disturbing part is because it's Hot Pie. Remember, one of the, some of the names on her list. I think it might have been Raph the Sweetling in the books, and I can't remember exactly. But whoever it was that originally took Needle and killed Lomi, the reason he's on that list is because he killed one of her friends. But now she treats one of her friends as if he's only as useful as he is useful,
Well, that's exactly why the Hound was on the list, because he killed the butcher's boy, right?
Yeah,
so we've seen how the previous Arya held her friends in such high regard, and then compare that with this scene, as you've quite eloquently mentioned. There's very little emotion in this scene, especially for someone who, as I've just said, holds friendships in such high regard that she'd actually put someone on the list because of bad things that they've committed with regards to her friends. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I love it. Absolutely. I mean, that's pretty much my whole point about that part.
Three arguments then. First argument would be she does invite him to sit. Oh, Hot Pie, come sit. Whether or not that's just to get the food or whatever, who knows? She does, arguably for Arya, she's in a world where she thinks pretty much everyone in her family is dead. It's not until Hot Pie mentions the Starks that we actually do see the emotion. But when she leaves, she does put her hand on Hot Pie's shoulder.
It was good to see you again, Hot Pie, yeah. But she still says it so it's just dead in the face, though. You can say whatever you want, but is it true?
It's also perhaps that she knows she has a better understanding of the world that they're living in right now, so she's not allowing herself to sort of get that hope that she had when she was young, when she was traveling around with everybody, and as soon as she would get there, that person would be dead, and then that person would be dead. And maybe she's just not allowing herself, but then she does. Jon's alive, and she's heading for Jon. I still think she's heading north, and I think she's going to have some conflict with Sansa.
Yeah, so actually the next one of the notes I was going to make after that is I should clarify, I'm not 100% on board. Like, I don't necessarily think it's for sure she's going to turn around and head for King's Landing, because one other way I can see this going is if she does go north, maybe her and Nymeria will meet back up later on when she does decide to go south, if she does decide to go south for any reason, and maybe she'll be at a point in that journey at this time that Nymeria will join her. If she had said to Nymeria, "Come with me, Nymeria, we have some people to kill," maybe Nymeria would have joined her. I don't know, just a thought.
Perhaps.
But yeah, that's one thing I would say about that. It was interesting that Nymeria, even you said that the wolves were all growling at her except Nymeria, but actually at first Nymeria was growling and baring teeth, and it wasn't until Arya put down the sword that Nymeria calmed down, and it kind of reminds me of Arya in a way where she's at a point where Nymeria knows you can't trust any human with a weapon. If that human has a weapon, her history or her experience is that human will try to kill you. Which reminds me of Arya in a sense. She has learned not to really trust anybody, not even the people she thought she knew.
That's a brilliant point, DJ.
Yeah. And there's still sort of that connection there between them then, where they don't trust.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely parallels. I mean we know the Starks and the Wolves are very well connected. I would also just like to note how awesome the direwolf looked. That thing was huge. That was so cool. I really enjoyed seeing it next to one of the other wolves, and you just really understand how big these things get.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if they did sort of put it up on a higher sort of block.
Yeah, and CGI it, of course. Yeah.
You really have the theme of Ice and Fire present in this episode, with obviously the wolf, as you've mentioned, contrasted with the skull of Valyria and the Dread. It's quite interesting how they play those themes off against one another.
Yep.
But anyway.
Sure. No, absolutely. No, great point. I was thinking something along those same lines too. Yeah, you sort of, it puts in perspective how big dragons can be and how big direwolves can be. Kind of an interesting parallel. And the only other note for this scene, for the Arya stuff, I'll note is that I think it's clear that Nymeria is mind controlling the other wolves. Without any kind of noise or anything, Nymeria turns around and the other wolves turn around and immediately go with her. As soon as Nymeria calms down, all the other wolves calm down, that kind of thing. So
I don't know if that's necessarily mind control or if it's just Nymeria is the alpha, and that's how wolfpacks act, right?
Because you've brought up before the idea that it's possible that at the very least Ghost can skin change. I know you've mentioned this before. So
no, we were talking in private when I said that, because it's somebody.
I apologize.
Somebody else had mentioned that. So that's a friend of mine on Facebook had mentioned this, and I thought it was very brilliant. So I brought it up to you gentlemen in private, but we won't get into that because it's not our theory to speak about.
Well, I would just say this, and this is even in the books, because direwolves and wolves are not the same species of animal, if we want to, whatever, get scientific with this, but I think that there's probably something a little more than just being the alpha that allows her to so coordinate with these other wolves. I just wonder if there is, we know, just like the Starks, right? Each one maybe manifests a little bit different, but they all have some sort of power when it comes to manipulating or reading or going into minds in some way. And I think the wolves can reflect that at different points.
True. Even in the book, sorry, Calum, I'll be quick. We have the wolves sort of communicating with each other through distances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The wolf pack, the Stark wolf pack. And that's how they know that people are still around and stuff like that. But I don't know if that's technically mind control. Anyways, go ahead.
Well,
Calum.
I used mind control sort of as a convenient way to phrase it. I don't think it's literally they're zombies to her. I just think that there is some kind of, I don't know, like a hive-mindedness kind of thing, or in some way she's manipulating them.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really interesting thread to pull on that you've brought up there, DJ. My personal opinion is similar to Duncan's in the sense of I think it's more just a representation of how these wolf packs work in real life, in that they are very instinctively driven to just sort of follow and sort of reciprocate the actions of the alpha. So when she's snarling, they're snarling, and then as she backs away, they realize that their alpha isn't attacking this person, therefore they're instinctively driven to follow, as opposed to individually attack. So if Nymeria had attacked, they would have then followed. I think it's more sort of a simple instinctive follow the leader sort of hierarchy, as opposed to anything supernatural. But having said that, I do think that it is an interesting point you make.
Well, can I also bring up then too in the books that this is very different, because from what I remember in the books, Nymeria's wolf pack is the biggest wolf pack on this continent.
Yes, it is.
So I don't know. It just seems like that would be kind of weird. Just you have one dire wolf come down and suddenly, every wolf in the Riverlands is following it. I think that there's probably something a little bit more there.
That's a very good point. You're right. It's described in the books as like hundreds, right? Or at least 100.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like seriously gigantic wolf pack. So.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that they do work in hierarchies, and it would make sense because obviously wolves, similar to the Dothraki, they follow power, and with her being such a physically more powerful, obviously relating to the size of Nymeria compared to the other wolves, it would make sense that she would garner a huge following just purely because of the scale and the power that she possesses. And with wolves, wolves recognizing that power and therefore choosing to follow. But I do completely see what you're saying. There's definitely some things to be explained with.
I can add that too. It's sort of like you say, the Dothraki, and so Nymeria's wolf pack. She then goes and attacks another wolf pack, dispatches the alpha there, and then they follow, kind of like the Dothraki do as well, right?
Yeah,
it could work that way.
It's very anthropomorphic, but yeah. In the sense that I obviously kind of silly to compare this to real life, but in real life, I don't think it would quite work like that. I don't think, but yeah, no, it's just an interesting thought, I think.
DJ's correct too. Like in the books, we do have communication between the wolves over great distances.
Yes.
That's something that's factually given us.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh no, I definitely would not discard that thread. It is interesting. I just didn't think that it's to the extent of that supernatural.
All right, Calum, you hate me. I get it. That's fine. But no, that's all I got for Arya.
You must agree with me. Okay, that's all I got too.
Shall we finally progress to the naval battle scene so I can go get some dinner?
Yes, please. Let's do it.
I feel like we might have gone on longer than we thought we were going to, but maybe not.
I think so. Yeah.
We're on 2 hours now, I believe.
Seriously?
No. I think we're on 3 hours now.
Yeah. But anyway,
it's interesting because I have very minimal notes compared to the previous episode, and yet we've somehow.
I have way more notes than I did
okay.
last episode. Yeah.
So should we? Do one of you guys want to kick us off on this, or shall I make a point?
I will. I have very little notes on this last bit, so I'll just be able to add on to anything you guys say. The only thing about the crappy scene with Ilaria and Yara,
that's where I was going to start.
Picked up was the only thing of value that I could take from that was a boy, a girl, depends on the port. I think this ties exactly back into the prince or princess who is promised. It depends on where you are, who this person is going to be. The prince that was promised that brings the dawn, or the princess that was promised that brings the dawn. Either or it could do. It's within all of us, right? The dawn thing.
I actually can I say something about that? I wonder if at the end of this, if there won't be something that explicitly tells us who is the prince or princess as promised, but if depending on how you look at it, you choose who you want to be the prince or princess who was promised.
Well,
There won't be something obvious saying this was the prince or this was the princess after all. You're just supposed to sort of decide for yourself.
Yeah, I like that way better than having Azura High or the PWWP.
With some of the extremely forced dialogue we've had in this episode, I wouldn't be too sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, let's hold out hope for the book.
Let's hope you are right anyway, DJ.
Yeah.
And let's hope it isn't Missandei saying, "Oh, look, here's the prince that was promised. It's Daenerys." Woohoo!
Yep, exactly.
So yeah.
Before we get into the battle, let me make a note about the Ilaria scene.
I also have something to say about the.
I don't have anything about battles or anything. I'm just gonna run through this. There are two sand snakes on the prow. The dead ones were hanging off the boat at the end.
Yep.
And it's the second episode in a row where we see the two flames sort of leaving the camera angle, like getting driven further back. Even though the surrounding area is all covered in fire, you see the two flames, the eyes, if you will, going backwards. That's all I have on the whole thing.
Okay.
I can say something quickly about the Ilaria Yara scene.
Go for it. Yep.
I mean, I might be clutching at straws a bit here, but I thought it was fairly ironic that that Yara used the fact that Euron's offer to Dany came alongside his big cock, and yet they were the one, like their sort of sexual tendencies, if you like, were arguably the reason that they were caught off guard. So it's interesting that that sort of juxtaposition. Like Dany didn't want Euron because of his offer came with like an offer of marriage, and yet Dany's lost out severely in this naval dispute due to the fact that potentially they were caught off guard because of the actions that they were carrying out. But anyway, that was just a side comment. Go ahead.
I would say even more, it brings up a question of how the hell did they get caught off guard when they have a bunch of ships? It's not like it's just that one ship. You know what I mean? How did nobody raise the alarm like, hey, there's an entire armada here,
it weaved its way through all the shit. Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't think that they were the very first one. In fact, we can clearly see that they weren't, but yet.
But again, this is stuff I guess you put aside for the dramatic enactment on the show.
Arguably, Euron's ship is called Silence.
Yeah, nice.
So,
I like it. Yeah. The first note I have here has to do with the Ilaria scene, the Ilaria Yara scene, and it just says, it's a quote, it says, "A foreign invasion is underway. Total shit." Just total shit. That was one of the worst lines I think they've ever written. If we had to choose a quote we really liked from every episode, this would be the whatever the opposite of that is.
That you hate? Okay.
Line, potentially in any episode I've ever seen. I just thought that was so poorly done, but
yeah, the whole scene was kind of like
a little cringy almost.
Yep. I was even trying to figure out a reason why her legs spread, and to try to dig into it that way. I couldn't find much in this scene.
Yep, at least that part. Yeah, I mean the naval battle itself we'll talk about separately, but yeah,
I think Ilaria would have done all the digging necessary in that situation.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a joke to say too, but I couldn't think of one. I guess one note I could make is when Theon is pouring ale for Ilaria and Yara says he's not your servant, reminded me a bit of Daenerys standing up to Ilaria for Tyrion.
Mm-hmm.
Reminded me a little bit of that.
Good.
That's about it for I think that I could come up with, but I might have been distracted by the horrible writing. So
yeah, it's so weird to have scenes like that in this show, right? Because it's got such good writing and all.
It's set so many bars. Yeah, exactly. Like it set the standard, and then it's when it sinks below it, you're just.
It seems like they're making like a cognitive and purposeful attempt to sort of.
You just had a ghost fly behind you, by the way. Totally saw it.
In the room.
Okay. Anyway.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
What was I saying? Someone just destroyed my train of thought.
About how much you loved the scene with Ilaria and Yara, something about that.
Oh, no, I had something really good to say. What was I saying? What were my final words?
I don't know. I was listening, and then I went into and I driven everything out. DJ, you go. Calum will remember
Yeah,
it.
well, if you come back, we'll come back to it. The next note I have has to do with the naval battle, and it's who uses a fucking whip against a boarding party. I just thought that was also kind of a ridiculous choice. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I didn't like the battle scene, because I did. It was pretty cool, but I thought the whip was just a ridiculous thing to do. I don't know who would pull out a whip
I
to
think
fight
it was
off a boarding party.
specifically, yes, I agree with you. It was ridiculous. It was specifically there to represent the Viper whipping around like a snake. That was the only.
Well, I know that's the weapon she uses even in the books. Like that's she has a whip or whatever, and that's fine. But when you're attacked by a boarding party,
Yeah.
unless you want to die, it's probably a good idea to use a sword or something.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Just thought that was stupid.
You haven't figured it out yet, Calum?
Oh, this is actually really annoying me because I had something quite interesting to say, and I've just
What were you talking about? So it was.
lost my train of thought. I
We were
don't
talking
believe
about
it.
Ale.
Standing up for Tyrion. And Danny standing up for Tyrion.
Yeah, there was that.
I'll just move on. I've lost it. I'll rewatch.
Type
Sorry.
it into the comments afterwards if we never get back to it.
Yeah.
Everybody who's gonna watch this feels your pain because we've all been there. So,
But anyway, I'll move on. So, one thing that I thought was really well done, and I was quite impressed by this was sort of the intricate details that the show managed to encapsulate, which was the fact that Euron was the only fighter in this scene, to my knowledge, and I may have missed someone, but I'm fairly certain that Euron was the only fighter wearing plate mail. And if you guys will recall, this is quite a fantastically accurate representation of Euron as he is described in the book, because he's described as the only one who's willing to wear heavy armor due to his sort of his lack of fear for drowning. For is the best way I can put it. So in the books, he's described as wearing plate mail because he's just so unafraid of drowning. Whereas you'll know that everyone else was wearing leather. So I just thought that was quite an interesting catch.
Because plate mail will pull you under the water faster.
Yeah.
Yes, gotcha.
yep. No, I think that's an excellent catch. I
That
totally
might be
missed
the
that.
exposition that fills in the blanks for anybody that couldn't figure that out.
That's your hand
I
pistol.
apologize.
No, I totally missed that. So I think that was a great catch.
No, I totally missed it too. I didn't see him in the plate mill at all. But in the book,
I did after you mentioned it to me before, Calum. I did go back and watch, and yep, right on. He's wearing the armor. Yep.
the Ironborn in the books are still the foggiest in my memory. It's the people that I remember the least about.
I thought the overall the fight scene was enjoyable, but I felt as though it was slightly overproduced for Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
So
for a second episode, it was a little weird
particularly
to have
the
that
bit
much production.
the part of the scene where Euron came down on the bridge and crushed someone whilst screaming. I felt that was a little bit much for me.
It was a
personally.
little overboard. Yeah.
I like
But
I mean,
but I
it was
thought-
fun, but it was just sort of like a little ridiculous, obviously.
yeah.
Think
But
of that.
to counter my own point, I really appreciated the way that they displayed the extent of Euron's barbarism, and I felt as though he was kind of skirting towards becoming sort of a joke of a character, and filling that role of a joker. Whereas obviously in the books he's described very much as a madman with no boundaries to his malevolence, if you like. And I feel as though that was very much captured in this scene, which is quite a nice respite from the previous Euron scenes that we've been dealt with.
Yeah, I actually, because in the last video we filmed, I mentioned how much I don't like Euron, and I still probably won't like him all that much, but I at least felt in this scene it was very fitting, and I thought they did a good job making him like maniacal and just like you said, crazy and barbaric. So I did enjoy him in this particular scene.
I feel, Calum, you said a joke of a character. I still feel like he's very representative of the Joker in general, like that sort of disregard for the rules and the laws of everybody, and just does his own sort of.
Yes.
To clarify, the
Absolutely.
Joker from Batman, right?
Batman, yes.
Absolutely.
And he's sitting there laughing, and I think they're kind of the same sort of character.
Completely agree.
Yeah, the laugh he does at the end, it really has a touch of mania in it. It just
When
sounds like
Theon jumps over the edge.
Yep,
and
yep.
he laughs there. Yeah, for
It
sure.
reminded me of the Joker for sure.
I appreciated the overproduction, but it just in the background, sort of the sparks falling everywhere, and I quite enjoyed it actually. I thought
something
it
about
was
something about the fireballs really threw me off. I don't know. It just there was one scene I remember where Yara like moves to the side and a fireball just whizzes by her and smashes into the ship. I thought it was a little out of place.
I hated that sort of stuff with the Battle of Bastards, like that one Jon Snow sequence that everybody loved. I thought it was just like too tic-tac-toe, like this happens, he goes there, does that, this, that, and the other thing. I enjoy a bit more chaos rather than a planned sort of, oh, step out of the way, there's a fireball.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah, I have one final point, but if you want to make any more points, DJ, go right ahead.
The last note for this scene that I have is insert Theon/Titanic joke here. Where he's like hanging out, in the water, just waiting. I just thought of Titanic for some reason.
Whatever.
But anyway, go ahead, Calum.
Yeah, my final point before I wrap up personally is I've heard people talking about how Theon doesn't quite fit the sort of the Greyjoy outlook and the Greyjoy stereotype, if you like. But I feel as though it's quite strange to me that people are making this sort of assertion because, of course, Theon didn't grow up on the Iron Islands, right? So it makes sense that he would have different values to the Greyjoys. And I feel as though this is, in actual fact, foreshadowed when he goes back to Pike in season 2 or 3. I can't remember which season. I think it's season 2. And his father ridicules him for paying the golden price for his belongings as opposed to the iron price, which obviously is testament to the differing values that they hold. And then this is again reiterated in this scene where he chooses to flee an unwinnable situation as opposed to fight and die with honor. But also I felt as though it was quite an interesting display of somewhat of an oxymoron by the fact that a very rational decision seemingly was carried out by a man with an extremely irrational state of mind. Because I feel as though although it was it was a cowardly decision what Theon chose to do, it was in many ways the only rational decision, assuming that his survival was his primary goal. Because obviously, if he had have gone to try and save Yara, Euron would have simply slit her throat and then killed him as well. So although he was, although the directors and the cameramen did a fantastic, and of course the actor himself did a fantastic job of implying that he was, back into his mindset of Reek and very irrational. I feel as though the decision he made was the opposite of that, which is my final point on the episode.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I think you explained it quite well. It gave the best result out of any result possible, right? Just because it was a cowardly move to do. Yara seemingly is still alive, and Theon's still alive and lives to fight another day. So you can't fault him so much for, and like DJ said, or you said, he just slits her throat and then kills Theon, and there's no win there. So.
Yep, I would also add too that he can now try to get back to Dany and relay this news. I actually, one of the questions I had at the end was, what happens to Theon from here? Do you think we're going to pick up with Theon much like we picked up with Davos in
That's sort of
3?
what I was figuring, yeah. I'm sort of looking at this as like yet another rebirth sort of moment for Theon.
Right, because he survived that fight, but that is a far cry from getting back to Dany and back to safety. So I'm just curious as to how that will move forward. I don't know, maybe they'll even just kind of skip past that and just have him get back to Dragonstone. I don't know, but
maybe Gendry will pick him up in his rowing boat.
There you go.
Oh God!
Hey, buddy, what are you doing here? I'm heading into Westeros. Want to look?
Gendry will ask about his son that was with Arya. I'll say, hey, have you seen my son? He works for the Lannisters now. But anyway, no, that's great. Fucking Gendry.
I know, Calum, you have to go. I did have one last thing, and you sort of reminded it, and this was back to Dany. The notion of going home again. me sort of being a Canadian, yet I'm Scottish ancestry, right? And I consider myself Canadian, but when I dig into my history, I look at my Scottish roots. And that was sort of like, even though Theon was raised by the Starks, he still considers himself from Pike, right? Yet the most poignant lessons he's learned are probably the Stark lessons. But he still sort of regresses. And I had a big story about when I flipped out on somebody that was making Scottish jokes, but we'll forget that because I know people got to go. As do I. But
that seems like an interesting discussion that we can have in private.
Sure.
But anyway, that's it for me, guys.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thanks again for stopping by, guys, and we'll be here next week, I believe, correct?
Every single week for the end of time.
Or the next 5 weeks, one of those two.
Yeah,
one of the two.
All right.
I want to do chapter discussions as well when Wins finally inevitably comes out. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and that'll wrap it up from us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.